My name was Kai Sorn, and I used to schedule freight trucks for a living. I died at my desk at 2 in the morning, 46 hours into a shift, still holding a cold cup of coffee. I remember the light on my monitor. I remember thinking one more shipment, just one more, and then nothing. I never got an explanation for how I ended up here. No white light, no smiling guide, no contract to sign. One moment I was staring at a spreadsheet full of delayed shipments, and the next I was cold, wet, and screaming in a language I somehow already understood, surrounded by adults with fur, claws, and expressions that made it very clear I had been born into the wrong body at the wrong time. I did not get months to sit with the confusion of it. There was no time for that here. A body that cannot hunt, cannot fight, and cannot even keep itself warm does not get a grace period to process an existential crisis. It gets a countdown. I woke up small, smaller than small. I woke up as a runt. 4 paws, a tail I kept tripping over, and a chest that wheezed if I ran more than 10 steps. The other pups in the den had claws already. I had fingernails that could not even scratch a tree properly. Nobody explained any of this to me. I figured it out the way you figure out a bad job assignment, by getting stuck with the worst tasks and watching everyone else get promoted around you. The Ashfang pack called me Scraps. Not out of cruelty exactly, out of accounting. I ate food, I took up space in the den, and I could not hunt, could not fight, could not do anything a Beastman pup was supposed to do at 9 years grown. In a tribe that measured worth in teeth and muscle, I was a line item nobody wanted to keep funding. I want to be fair to them. Winters here killed the weak fast, and killed everyone slow if the pack carried too much dead weight. I understood the math, even while I hated being the number it was done on. I had run supply chains for 3 years in my old life. I knew exactly what a manager did with an asset that cost more than it produced. So when the traders came, I was the first name on the list. The den sat in a shallow valley, ringed by pine and gray stone, smoke holes cut into hide roofs. The kind of settlement that looked permanent right up until you noticed how thin the winter stores were stacked against one wall. It was, by any measure I understood from my old work, a supply chain running on a deficit that nobody had admitted out loud yet. Cassian Voss did not look like a monster. That was the part that unsettled me most once I understood what he was. He looked like a man who enjoyed his work, mid-40s, clean gloves, a ledger tucked under one arm like he was doing inventory instead of buying people. His overseer held the branding iron like it was a stamp for crates. 6 of us knelt in the dirt outside the den that morning. 2 adults, 3 pups near my age, and me. The overseer walked the line, reading numbers off a slate, checking teeth, checking grip strength, checking whatever passed for quality control among Beastman merchandise. I knew every name in that line. Dinah, who could carry a deer twice her weight. Old Herrick, whose knees had finally given out after 30 seasons of hunting for a tribe that was now selling him for parts. Kesh, 6 years grown, small enough that his mother still carried him on hard travel days. The overseer walked past Dinah and Herrick with a grunt of approval, marked something on his slate, and moved down the line like a man checking crates off a shipping manifest. He got to me and laughed. "This one is barely worth the rope," he said, to nobody in particular. Half-starved, no claws to speak of. Branding him as a waste of good iron. Voss glanced over anyway, the way a buyer glances at a discount bin. Brand it. A weak one still sells for something. The overseer grinned and hefted the iron, and it caught the morning light along its edge. He crouched in front of me so close, I could smell the coal smoke on his gloves. "Hold still, Runt, and this only takes a moment," he said. "Cry all you want after. Nobody here is going to stop me. I want to tell you I had a plan. I did not. I had 27 years of a different life screaming at me that this was wrong, that I should be filing a complaint, that somewhere there should be a manager I could escalate this to. There was no manager. There was an iron heating over coals 12 feet away, and a line of my own people watching to see who broke first. I broke first, I think. Inside, where nobody could see it yet. That is when the voice arrived. It did not sound like thunder or divinity. It sounded like a notification chime, flat and procedural, the kind of tone that used to mean a shipment had cleared customs. Interworld Courier System activated. Courier Tier 0 registered. Stated delivery request. I had exactly no idea what that meant and exactly no time to figure it out. The overseer was 3 names closer down the line. I thought the only honest thought available to a dying man with nothing left to lose. Anything, I thought. Please, just send me anything. Something appeared in my open hands. Cool, plastic, familiar in a way that hurt. A sealed bottle of water, the kind with a blue label I used to buy from a vending machine on my old lunch break. "Delivery complete," said the voice. "Remaining trust credit, 0. Delivery weight limit, 200 grams. I stared at it. The overseer stared at it. For one long second, nobody in that clearing knew what they were looking at, including me. Then Kesh screamed. Kesh was the smallest of the other pups in line, younger than me, and he had been refusing water since dawn out of pure terror, shaking too hard to drink from the trough even when his mother begged him. Now he was folding sideways into the dirt, lips cracked, eyes rolling back. His mother was 3 bodies down the line, restrained by a guard, screaming his name in a voice that cracked halfway through every syllable. Nobody moved to help him. Moving meant a spear in your back before you covered 5 feet. I did not think about the system. I did not think about Voss or the iron or my own name on that list. I crawled across the dirt on hands and knees and cracked the seal on that bottle and poured it into Kesh's mouth before a single guard decided to stop me. He coughed. He swallowed. He grabbed the bottle with both hands like it was the only solid thing in the world. His mother stopped screaming his name and started saying it instead, quiet, over and over, like she needed to hear it in a voice that was not breaking. The clearing went silent in a way that had weight to it. I want to be honest with you. I did not do that to prove anything. I did it because I have watched people die of things that were preventable, and something in me refused to watch it happen twice in one lifetime. That was the only calculation I made. But everyone else in that clearing made a different calculation, watching a half-starved runt with no claws produce clean water out of thin air for a dying pup. The overseer's hand had stopped moving toward me with the iron. Sable moved first. I did not know her name yet, only her rank. The pack's war leader, a woman built like she had personally argued with a mountain and won. Scars ran along one forearm, where something with a lot of teeth had once disagreed with her and lost. She crossed the clearing in 3 strides and put her body between me and the branding iron before anyone, including her, had decided whether that was wise. "Nobody touches him again until I understand what that was," she said, not a request. The overseer looked at her, the way men look at a wall they have just noticed is load-bearing. He did not lower the iron, but he did not raise it either. "You would defend the runts over your own trade agreement, war leader?" he said. "I would defend anyone who just saved the pup's life in front of me," she said. "Ask your ledger what that is worth." The overseer looked at Voss. Voss looked at me the way I used to look at a supplier who had suddenly, unexpectedly, developed leverage. "Interesting," Voss said. His voice stayed level, almost pleasant, which frightened me more than shouting would have. "I do not sell curiosities cheap. Bring me the runt as a talking trophy instead of branded stock, and we will call this morning a wash." Sable did not move. "He is pack," she said. "He is not property to be relabeled." Voss smiled like a man reading a contract clause in his own favor. Pack, property, these are just words for who gets to decide. I will return for my decision. Consider this a delay, not a refusal. He looked at me directly for the first time since the water appeared, and there was nothing warm in it, only arithmetic. "Whatever you did just now, boy, I have buyers who pay very well for a curiosity. Cooperate when I return, and your whole den eats through the winter on my coin. Refuse, and I burn this arrangement down and take what I want anyway." I did not answer him. I had learned that much in my old life at least. Never negotiate a number out loud until you know what the other side actually needs. He turned and walked out with his overseer and his empty ledger, and I understood, even with no experience of this world at all, that I had just bought us time and not safety. That night, the temperature dropped hard enough that I could see my own breath, and half the den had no dry wood after 2 days of rain. I sat apart from the others, the way I always had, half expecting someone to finish what Voss had started. I could hear them arguing about me 2 fires over, not quietly enough. One voice said I was a sign, that the ancestors had sent something to answer the traitors. Another voice, older and angrier, said I was a liability that had just made Voss furious instead of merely disappointed, and that furious buyers came back with soldiers instead of ledgers. Both of them were right, as it turned out. That was the first lesson this world taught me. Nothing here was going to be simply good news. Kesh's mother found me before Sable did. She did not say much. She pressed a strip of dried meat into my hand, more than her share by the look of her own ribs, and walked away before I could refuse it or thank her properly. Instead, Sable sat down across from me. "Do that again," she said, whatever that was. "I do not know how it works yet," I told her, honestly. "It just gave you water once." "Then find out." She said it flatly, the way a commander gives an order she expects to be followed, rather than discussed. I have buried 3 pups this winter to cold, and 1 to a fever that clean water might have stopped. If you have a way to change those numbers, Runt, I do not care what god or trick gave it to you. I did not correct her about the God part yet. I did not have the energy to explain a courier system to a woman who had just spent the day bearing a plan to save my life inside a threat against a slave trader. I closed my eyes and asked, the way you ask a system for a report you are not sure exists yet. Anything for fire, I thought. Anything at all. Delivery available. Item, disposable lighter. Weight, 40 grams. Trust credit required, 1 unit. Current trust credit, 1 unit. Granted. A small plastic lighter appeared in my palm, orange, half used, exactly like the one I used to keep in my desk drawer for reasons I could no longer remember. My hand shook a little, closing around it. Somewhere between two lives, I had forgotten how heavy an ordinary object could feel. I flicked it once, and a flame jumped up clean and steady. No flint, no friction, no ritual at all. Sable did not flinch, but her ears went very still, which I would later learn was the Beastman version of holding your breath. Behind her, an old hunter named Old Herrick stopped mid-stride, one hand still bandaged from the morning's inspection, and stared at the flame like it owed him money. That is not fire the way fire is supposed to work, Herrick said. No sparkstone, no friction, nothing but a click. I do not fully understand it either, I told him, which was the truest thing I had said all day. The pack gathered wood, and I lit it in under a second. And for the first time since I had woken up in this small, weak, unclawed body, nobody in that clearing was looking at me like a line item to be cut. Children who had avoided me for weeks crowded close enough to feel the heat on their faces. One of them reached out and touched my sleeve, quick, like checking whether I was real. I let them warm their hands before I let myself think about what any of this meant. Interworld Courier System, Courier Tier 0, rank advancement pending, said the voice, quiet enough that only I could hear it. Current items unlocked, water, basic hygiene tools, disposable fire sources, advancement condition, solve one further survival deficiency for verified beneficiaries. I did not understand ranks or tiers or trust credit yet. I understood one thing clearly enough to build a life on it. This system was not going to hand me power because I asked nicely or because I was desperate. It paid out only when the people around me were actually, measurably better off. That felt almost like a job I already knew how to do. I had spent 3 years optimizing routes so that a warehouse in one city did not sit empty while a store in another ran out of stock. Nobody had ever called that divine. Here, apparently, keeping one pup hydrated and one fire lit qualified. I asked the voice, silently, what it would take to go further. The answer came back precise and entirely unhelpful in the way of every system I had ever dealt with in my old life. Current tier, Courier Tier 0, Rank F. Advancement requires verified resolution of a distinct survival deficiency beyond current unlocked categories. Estimated categories remaining: food security, shelter integrity, physical safety, trade capacity, organized defense. Sequence is not selectable by requester. In other words, I could not simply ask for a sword because I wanted one. I had to earn the right to need one, in an order the system had already decided, whether I liked its priorities or not. It was the least surprising thing that had happened to me all day. Word spread through the den by morning anyway, the way word always does, faster and stranger with every retelling. By the time the sun cleared the tree line, half the tribe was calling me something I never asked for and did not want yet. They were calling me a god. Not everyone agreed. An elder named Yura, a thin, gray-furred woman who had outlived 3 chiefs, stood at the edge of the fire circle with her arms crossed and refused to come closer. Gods do not arrive as the smallest pup in the den, she said, loud enough for the others to hear. Whatever that trick was, it bought us one bad morning against one traitor. It did not buy us a winter. She was not wrong, and I told her so, which seemed to surprise her more than any claim of divinity would have. I am not a god, I said. I am someone who can bring you things you need, sometimes, if I understand what your people are actually short of. That is closer to a job than a miracle. She studied me for a long moment, the way you study a stranger's math before you trust it with your accounts. Then prove it with something that outlasts one clever morning, she said, and walked away without waiting for an answer. I intended to. I was 27 years old in my last life, and in this one, I was barely tall enough to see over a cooking pot, and I had exactly 2 items in a system I did not understand, and 0 claws to defend myself if Voss came back angrier than he left. But Kesh was alive, sleeping curled against his mother's side instead of shaking in the dirt. The fire was burning through its second hour without a single hand fed it fuel out of fear. And somewhere out past the tree line, a man with clean gloves and an empty ledger was already recalculating what my life was worth to him, in numbers I had not yet learned to read. He would be back. I did not know when. I only knew that the next time, water and a lighter would not be enough, that an old woman's math about one clever morning was correct, and that whatever this system wanted from me in exchange for more, it was going to make me earn every single piece of it, one saved life at a time, one solved problem at a time, until either the tribe trusted me enough to grow, or Voss came back with more men than Sable could stand against alone. I fell asleep that night with a stranger's fire, warming a body that was not mine yet, in a world that had already decided what to call me before I had decided who I wanted to be in it. Somewhere out past the tree line, I imagined Cassian Voss walking back toward whatever counted as an office in this world, already drafting the next offer, the next threat, the next number he would put on my head. I did not know yet how many times he would come back, or how much it would cost the people around me before he finally stopped. I only knew that Yura's challenge sat heavier in my chest than Voss's threat had. Anyone can survive one dangerous morning on luck. Proving I was worth more than that to a tribe that had already buried 3 pups this winter was going to take every day after this one. 3 days passed after Voss walked out of our clearing and nothing happened, which was somehow worse than if something had. I had spent enough years in logistics to know that silence from a supplier who owes you an answer is rarely good news. It usually means they are calculating, not forgetting. I told Sable as much on the second night, sitting by the fire she had started keeping near mine without either of us commenting on it. He is not gone, I said. He is pricing us. Sable turned a whetstone over a blade she did not strictly need to sharpen again. Then we wait and watch the tree line, she said. Same as always. That is not how prices work, I told her. A man does not walk away from a bad negotiation and simply forget the number. He goes back to whoever funds him, adjusts his offer, and returns with an argument he thinks you cannot refuse. Somewhere south of here, Voss is deciding exactly what that argument will be. Sable studied me for a long moment, the way she studied unfamiliar terrain before deciding whether to cross it. You think like a man who has done this before, she said. Not fought, negotiated. Where I came from, I said, that was the fight. She did not ask what I meant by that, not yet, and I did not offer more than the sentence allowed. Except, it was not the same as always. Not for me. I had 2 items in a system I barely understood. A tribe that was half convinced I was a sign from the ancestors, and half convinced I was a liability wearing a pup's skin, and a hunger problem underneath all of it that neither water nor fire had touched. On the 4th day, Voss's overseer came back alone, without the ledger, without his employer, and with 6 armed men instead of 2. That should have made me feel safer than a full delegation would have. It did not. He had Dinah with him, wrists bound in rope that had rubbed her skin raw, walking between 2 guards with her chin up and her eyes flat in the particular way of someone refusing to give her captors the satisfaction of watching her break. She had gone out that morning to gather deadfall wood at the tree line, the same task she did every 3rd day without incident, and had simply not come back until this. Your fire trick bought you attention, the overseer said, stopping at the edge of our fires like he already owned the ground beneath him. It did not buy you a contract. Master Voss has decided the terms himself, since you would not decide them for him. Give him the runt willingly, or he keeps this one instead, and takes you regardless once he has more men to spare for it. I looked at Dinah. She looked back at me, steady, refusing to be smaller than the moment required. The way a person looks at you when they have already privately decided not to become a bargaining chip in their own head, even while their body is currently serving as exactly that in someone else's hands. Sable's fingers found the knife at her belt. I put my own hand over hers before the motion could become anything more than a thought. Wait, I said, quiet enough that only she could hear it. Let me talk first. She did not look pleased about it. She waited anyway, jaw tight. Weight shifted onto the balls of her feet in case talking failed. 4 days ago, she would not have waited a full breath on a runt's word. That she waited now told me something had already shifted, even if neither of us had said it out loud yet. I had spent 3 years of my old life reading vendor contracts, written to sound generous, while hiding exactly where the real cost sat, buried in a clause nobody read past the 2nd paragraph. Voss's overseer was doing the same thing now, dressed in threats instead of legal language, and it took me exactly 1 long breath to see the shape underneath it. You are not here to collect me, I said. You are here because Voss cannot afford to walk away from this valley empty-handed a second time. Taking a hostage is not confidence. It is what a man does when his first offer already failed. The overseer's jaw tightened, just slightly, in the exact place where a real answer would have gone if he had one ready to give. Watch your mouth, runt, he said. I kept my voice level because I had learned from a dozen bad negotiators in my old life exactly what happens when you let silence sit too long against you at a moment like this. It calcifies into an answer of its own, and never the answer you want. Word travels fast among traders, I said. Faster still when the story is that a Beastman camp humiliated a respected buyer twice in 1 week. Slower maybe, if you can silence it with a hostage today. But it does not disappear. It waits. And when it surfaces, it will not ask whether the hostage was returned unharmed. It will only ask why Master Voss needed one at all. That is not true, he snapped, a half second too fast, in the exact tone people use when something lands closer to true than they wanted it to. Isn't it? I said. I do not know his other buyers personally. I know what a reputation costs to rebuild once it cracks in front of witnesses. And I know that every guard standing behind you right now is also a witness who will talk in some tavern 3 valleys from here, whether Voss wants them to or not. One of the guards behind him shifted his weight, small, almost nothing. The kind of motion that tells you a man is doing arithmetic in his head, even while his face insists otherwise. Sable stepped forward then, not to fight, but to stand beside me rather than in front of me, which was its own kind of statement to everyone watching. Release her, Sable said, and walk away with your master's reputation, dented but intact. Keep her, and every trader south of this valley learns exactly how Voss treats a partner he has not even finished negotiating with. The overseer looked at his men. 2 of them would not meet his eyes, which told me they had already run the same numbers I had just said aloud, and did not like where they landed. Fine, he said, too fast to sound like it was actually fine to him. Keep your runt and your hostage both, for now. Master Voss will remember exactly which of you argued hardest for it. He cut Dinah's ropes himself, rough, more out of spite than mercy, the blade closer to her wrist than it needed to be, and pulled his men back into the tree line without another word or a backward glance. Dinah rubbed the raw skin at her wrist and walked straight to me instead of to Sable, which surprised both of us more than it should have. You talked him out of it, she said. Not a fight, words. Words are cheaper than funerals, I said, which came out more tired than clever, but she laughed anyway, short and disbelieving, the kind of laugh that needs the sound of itself as proof that the danger is really over. Sable watched the tree line long after the last of Voss's men had disappeared into it, arms crossed, weight still balanced forward like the fight she had not been allowed to have. You could have let me end it there, she said. 6 men. I have handled worse odds. And if you had, I said, Voss would have had exactly the excuse he wanted. Dead guards instead of a failed negotiation. He would have come back with an army inside a week instead of a season. And this time, nobody south of here would have blamed him for it. She did not answer immediately. When she did, it was quieter than her usual flat command. I do not like standing still while someone I am responsible for is threatened. Neither do I said. That is exactly why I talked instead of watched you draw that knife. Dinah walked back to her mother tonight. That is the whole victory. It does not need to look impressive to count. Sable's expression did not soften exactly, but something in her posture eased, the readiness for violence folding back into simple alertness. She said nothing else. But she did not walk away either, and we sat by that fire together longer than either of us strictly needed to. That night the fires burned a little brighter than usual, not because anything material had changed, but because for the second time in 4 days, the tribe had watched me win something without anyone bleeding for it. Trust, I was beginning to understand, moved in exactly that kind of small, stubborn increment, one uncontested outcome at a time. Interworld Courier System, Trust Credit Updated, Current Tier, Courier Tier 0, Rank F, Advancement Condition Unmet, Hunger Deficiency remains unresolved. I had half expected the system to reward the standoff somehow. It did not. Whatever counted as trust credit here clearly cared more about solved problems than won arguments, and hunger was still sitting underneath everything else, untouched, patient, indifferent to how clever my last 2 conversations had been. That became obvious the next morning at the food fire, where there was noticeably less to go around than there had been 4 days earlier. Not because Voss had taken anything. Winter simply did not pause for a dramatic standoff at the tree line, and the pack's stores had already been thin before I ever arrived in this body. Rook, the pack's best hunter, said as much, loud enough that I was clearly meant to hear every word of it. The runt talks well, he said, to the hunters seated around him, rather than to me directly, which was its own small insult. Words do not fill a smokehouse. My hands do that. Every season, whether anyone thanks me for it or not. I would like to know what exactly the runt plans to feed us, while Voss regroups and comes back angrier. I did not take offense, not really. He was not wrong to ask the question, and I had learned enough about this tribe's discipline to know that this kind of skepticism was not cruelty. It was how people who buried 3 pups last winter kept themselves alive through the next one, by refusing to trust anything that had not yet proven it could put food in front of them. I do not have an answer yet, I said, turning to face him directly this time, instead of letting him talk past me. But I intend to have one before this week is finished. Rook's ears flattened, entirely unimpressed, and he turned back to his hunters without another word, as if I had already used up my allotted attention for the morning. He stood partway through his own meal and addressed the fire circle at large, the way a man does when he wants witnesses more than he wants an actual conversation. Let the runt have his week then, Rook said, but let it be a fair test, not a favor granted quietly so nobody has to admit it failed. Before the next full moon, either the runt puts food on this fire that my hunting has not, or he stops being spoken of as any anything more than a lucky pup who once found a bottle of water. A few of the older hunters grunted agreement. Nobody objected. I understood immediately that Rook had just done me an unintended favor of his own, turning a private doubt into a public wager with a deadline, which meant that whatever I managed next would either count for something in front of the whole tribe or fail in front of the same audience with nowhere to hide the difference. Agreed, I said, before I had fully worked out how I intended to win it. Sable caught my eye across the fire, and I understood the look well enough without her needing to explain it. Words had bought me 2 clean victories against Voss's people. They were not going to buy me a third one against hunger, and certainly not against a man who measured a person's worth by what they could put on the ground in front of him. I asked the system directly that night, for the first time, exactly what I needed, instead of simply pleading for anything at all the way I had at the branding post. Anything for food, I thought, lying still in the dark. Anything that lasts longer than one meal. The answer came back slower than before, almost deliberate, like a report from a department that did not appreciate being rushed. Request denied. Direct food delivery exceeds current trust tier limitations. Recommended alternative. Resource tools enabling sustained food production by tribe members. Advancement condition. Verified resolution of hunger deficiency through tribe-operated means, not delivered supply. I lay with that answer for a long moment in the dark, my new small body curled tight against the cold that always found its way in through the den's thin walls. The system was never going to simply hand this tribe a meal. At most, it would hand me the tools to help them make one for themselves, and only if I could somehow convince Rook and the other hunters to accept help from the exact runt they had just publicly doubted in front of the whole camp. That was going to be harder than talking down an armed overseer with a knife on his hip and a hostage he did not actually want to keep. Words had worked there because Voss's man had something real to lose if he stayed stubborn. Rook had nothing to lose by simply proving me wrong in front of everyone, and every reason in the tribe's own harsh accounting to want to. Dinah found me again before I fell asleep, sitting down across the low fire without asking permission, which by now she had clearly decided she did not need. Rook is not trying to be cruel, she said. He watched 2 hunters starve last winter, trying to bring back 1 more kill than the season allowed. He does not trust anything that talks instead of hunts. Then I will need to give him something that does both, I said, more to myself than to her, already turning the shape of an idea over the way I used to turn over a broken delivery route back when my job was worth something to a spreadsheet instead of a starving tribe. I fell asleep with that half-formed idea still turning. No proof yet that it would work, only the certainty that Rook's contempt and the tribe's hunger were about to become the same problem, and that I was going to have to solve both of them in front of every witness who had watched me fail to solve either one yet. Sable woke me before dawn, crouched at the edge of my sleeping mat with a bowl of thin broth she had clearly saved from her own share. Rook set a deadline in front of the whole tribe, she said. That was not cruelty either. It was him giving you a target he actually believes you might hit, whether he admits that or not. He does not waste public wagers on someone he expects to simply vanish. I had not thought of it that way. I turned the idea over as I ate, the way I used to turn over a difficult client's complaint, looking for the version of it that was actually a request instead of a rejection. Then I have a full moon to prove it, I said, and I intend to use every day. Sable almost smiled, an expression that still looked unfamiliar on her face, like a muscle she was only beginning to remember how to use around me. Good, she said. I would rather stand beside a god who works for it than kneel to one who simply expects to be believed. I am not a god, I said, for what felt like the 10th time that week. I know, she said, already walking away. That is exactly why I am starting to believe you. Rook's wager gave me a full moon to prove myself, and I spent the first 3 days of it doing nothing that looked like progress at all. I sat by the fires and asked the system questions instead, the way I used to sit with a spreadsheet before touching a single number, because I had learned the hard way in my old life that acting before you understand the actual constraints just wastes the one resource you cannot get back. Interworld Courier System. Stated delivery request. Snares, I thought. Anything that helps catch food without needing claws to do it. Delivery available. Item, 5 wire snares, 1 block of preserving salt. Combined weight, 1.4 kilograms. Trust credit required, 3 units. Current trust credit, 2 units. Insufficient. I did not have enough trust yet. That answer stopped me harder than an outright refusal would have, because it meant the system was not simply gatekeeping me on principle. It was measuring something specific, some ledger of belief I could not see directly, and I was short by exactly 1 unit of it. I asked Dinah, carefully, without explaining the system itself, what might move that kind of number. She thought about it longer than I expected before answering. Sable's word carries weight already, she said, but you have not yet done anything the whole pack witnessed together, not just the ones near the branding trading post or the tree line. A public act, seen by everyone at once, might do it. That evening, I asked the tribe to gather at the central fire. All of them, not just the hunters or the skeptics or the handful who already called me a sign. I did not have a plan for spectacle. I only had honesty, which felt like a strange thing to offer people who wanted proof of power. I am not going to promise you a miracle tonight, I said, standing where everyone could see me, small as I still was against the firelight. I am going to tell you exactly what I can and cannot do, because I think you have been lied to enough by people who promised more than they delivered. Rook crossed his arms from the back of the gathering, clearly expecting nothing from this except more words. I can bring small things from somewhere else, I continued. Water, fire, tools sometimes, if enough of you trust me enough for it to matter. I cannot bring food directly. I cannot bring weapons large enough to hunt with. What I can do is help the people who already know how to hunt do it better, if they will let me. I looked directly at Rook when I said the last part. He held my gaze for a long moment, and something in his stance shifted. Not agreement exactly, but the absence of automatic dismissal, which from him was close enough to progress. Inner World Courier System. Trust credit updated. Current tier. Courier tier 0. Rank F. Trust credit 3 units. The honesty had worked where a demonstration might not have. I understood then that this system was not just counting belief in my power, it was counting belief in my word, and those were not the same currency at all. I asked again that same night, alone by my own fire. Snares, I thought, and salt. Delivery complete. 5 wire snares, 1 block of preserving salt. Weight limit for current tier, 1.5 kilograms. Remaining capacity noted. 5 thin loops of steel wire and a block of white salt appeared in my hands. Ordinary and unglamorous, in a way that made them somehow more convincing than fire or water had been. This was not magic performing a trick. This looked like equipment, the kind of thing a person could actually use. I brought them to Rook the next morning, laid out on a flat stone between us, like an offering he had not asked for and clearly did not expect. I do not know how to set these properly, I told him, which was true, and which cost me nothing to admit. You do. If we work together, the snares catch more than your bow alone would in the same 3 days. And the salt keeps whatever we catch from spoiling before winter needs it. Rook studied the wire for a long moment, turning one loop over in his calloused hands, testing its give the way I imagine he tested a bowstring before trusting it with a shot that mattered. This is fine wire, he said finally, finer than anything our own smiths have made in 2 winters. Where does metal like this come from? Somewhere very far away, I said, which was the truest answer I had. He did not push further, which told me he had already decided the question mattered less than the results might. We worked the tree line together for 3 days after that. Rook setting snares along game trails he had tracked for years, me learning enough from watching him to be useful instead of decorative, checking lines, resetting triggers, hauling back what we found before scavengers could beat us to it. The first morning was mostly silence. Rook clearly testing whether I would slow him down or complain about the cold, the wet undergrowth, the hours of walking before dawn properly broke. I did neither, mostly because I had spent too many years showing up to warehouse floors at 4 in the morning to find the discomfort worth commenting on out loud. By midday, he finally spoke, more to the forest than to me. You do not talk as much as I expected, he said. I thought a runt who wins arguments with slave traders would want an audience for everything. Arguments are for people who need convincing, I said. You already agreed to try the snares. There is nothing left to argue about until they either work or they do not. He grunted at that, which I was beginning to understand was closer to approval than anything he would say outright. It was not glamorous work. My old job had not been glamorous either, mostly spreadsheets and phone calls and the occasional crisis at 3 in the morning. But I had been good at it because I paid attention to details other people considered beneath them, and that skill translated here better than I expected. I noticed which trails carried fresher tracks, which snares needed resetting after a near miss, which stretches of undergrowth Rook avoided out of old habit rather than current necessity, and I said nothing about any of it until he asked. By the second day, we had caught more than Rook's bow alone had managed in the same stretch the week before. By the third, word had spread through the whole camp, the way word always did, and children were following us at a respectful distance just to watch the wire loops work. Rook stopped mid-stride on the 3rd morning, staring at a snare that had caught a full-grown hare clean through the neck. No wasted meat, no suffering the animal had to endure. This is a good design, he said, grudging, like the words cost him something to hand over. Better than I expected from someone who cannot yet hold a bow steady. I did not design it, I said. I only brought it. You are the one who knew where to place it. He looked at me for a long moment, something shifting behind his expression that I recognized from every good working relationship I had ever built in my old life. The exact point where professional respect stops requiring personal affection to function. "Then we are square, Runt," he said. "For now, do not mistake this for worship." "I would never mistake anything you do for worship," I told him honestly, and for the first time since I had woken up in this small, unclawed body, he actually laughed, short and surprised at himself for doing it. That evening, at the fire where he had first set his public wager, Rook stood and addressed the tribe without my asking him to. "The Runt has not fed us with magic," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "He fed us by handing me tools I did not have and getting out of my way while I used them. That is not nothing. I withdraw my doubt, not because he proved himself a god, but because he proved himself useful, which matters more to people who are hungry." Interworld Courier System. Advancement condition met. Hunger deficiency resolved through tribe-operated means. Rank advancement pending. Resource tier unlocked. The voice's flat procedural tone somehow made the moment feel more real, not less. Like a shipment confirmation, arriving after months of a difficult account finally closing clean. Sable found me afterward, away from the fire, where the noise of the celebrating hunters could not quite reach us. "You did not need the whole tribe to believe you were divine," she said. "You only needed Rook to believe you were useful. That was smarter than anything I would have tried." "I am not smart," I said. "I have just spent years learning what makes people trust a number instead of a promise." She considered that for a moment, then asked the question I had been half expecting since the water bottle first appeared in my hands. "Where you came from," she said. "What were you, before all this?" "Somebody who moved things from one place to another," I told her, "and made sure nobody starved waiting for them to arrive. It turns out that skill travels between worlds better than I expected it to." She did not push for more than that, not yet, though I could see the question sitting behind her eyes, waiting for a night when I trusted her enough to answer it fully. Word of what had happened in our valley did not stay contained to our own fires for long. 3 days later, a runner arrived from the neighboring tribe's territory, breathless, demanding to speak with whoever was responsible for the strange miracles the traders were already whispering about 2 valleys over. "Their chief wants answers," the runner said, before I had even finished greeting him properly. "He believes a false god is being invented here to steal loyalty from tribes who cannot afford the theft." Sable's ears went flat at the accusation, but I raised a hand before she could answer for both of us. "Tell your chief I will come to him myself," I said, "and answer every question honestly, because I have nothing to hide from him that I have not already told my own people." The runner studied me for a long moment, clearly expecting either arrogance or fear, and finding neither. "He will not be gentle with you," the runner warned. "Neither was Voss," I said, "and neither was hunger. I am starting to get used to difficult audiences." Sable called a small council that same night, just the 4 of us who would make the journey, plus Dinah's mother, who had lived through 2 prior border disputes with the neighboring tribe, and remembered how the last one had ended. "They lost good hunting ground to us a generation ago," Dinah's mother said, over a fire built smaller than usual to keep the conversation private. "Their chief inherited that grudge along with his title. He will not need much reason to turn a rumor about false gods into an excuse for something worse." "Then we give him no reason at all," I said. "Only the truth, offered before he has to demand it." "Truth has not stopped a grudge in my lifetime," she said. Not unkindly, more like someone passing on a hard lesson to whoever would listen. "Maybe not," I said, "but I would rather test that theory once, honestly, than assume it is hopeless and give him an excuse to believe the worst about us anyway." Sable watched this exchange without speaking for a long while, then finally addressed the fire rather than any one of us directly. "We go," she said. 4 of us, no more, so it reads as a conversation and not a delegation preparing for war. If it goes wrong on our terms, not because we let fear decide the size of the party first. Nobody argued with that. I was beginning to understand, exactly the kind of decision that had kept this pack alive as long as it had, weighing the honest risk instead of the comfortable one. Rook, of all people, was the one who offered to travel with us the next morning, bow slung over one shoulder, a string of dried meat from our own new stores tied at his belt like proof he intended to present in person. "I fed my own people arguing with you," he said. When I raised an eyebrow at his volunteering, "I might as well watch you argue with someone else's chief too." We set out at dawn, Sable, Rook, Dinah, and myself, following a game trail east that Rook knew from old trading trips before the Beastman tribes had learned to distrust each other over territory disputes older than any of us. I spent the walk turning over what I would actually say to a chief who had every reason to see me as a threat instead of a curiosity. Dinah walked beside me for most of the first day, quieter than usual, until she finally asked the question I suspect she had been carrying since the ropes came off her wrists. Why does it matter to you so much, she asked. Whether a stranger's chief believes you, you already have this pack. Is that not enough? It would be enough for me, I said, if I only had to survive. But Voss is not going to stop at one valley, and a hostile neighbor gives him exactly the kind of opening he needs. An ally costs me honesty today. An enemy costs all of us far more later. She considered that in silence for a while, boots crunching over frost-hardened pine needles, before answering. That is a very tired way to think about the world, she said. It is a very old habit, I told her. I am hoping this one pays better than the last version did. Rook, walking a few paces ahead with his bow slung loose across one shoulder, glanced back at both of us without slowing his pace. Save your philosophy for the fire tonight, he said. We still have half a day's walk before the border markers, and I would rather not meet an unfriendly chief exhausted from talking instead of from walking. He was right, and we quieted after that, the four of us moving in the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who have already decided they trust each other enough not to need constant conversation to prove it. I lay awake that final night before we reached the border, turning over the shape of a new problem that words alone might not solve as cleanly as they had against an overseer or an empty smokehouse. Rook's respect had been earned through results he could touch and taste over 3 patient days. A foreign chief convinced I was some kind of fraud was going to want a different kind of proof entirely, the sort that risked everything I had built here if it went wrong in front of witnesses who owed me nothing and had no reason yet to forgive a mistake. Mira caught up to us at the last stream crossing before the border markers, out of breath, her ceremonial pouches bouncing against her hip with every stride. The elders sent me, she said, once she had enough air back to speak properly. If their chief intends to argue about gods and false signs, he will not want to hear it from a warrior and a hunter. He will want to hear it from someone who speaks that language fluently. I had seen her before, at a distance, tending the small shrine near the eastern edge of the den, but we had never spoken directly. She was younger than I expected for someone the tribe trusted with matters of the ancestors, sharp-eyed, watching me now, with an expression that was not quite suspicion and not quite belief either. You are smaller than the stories already claim, she said, studying me the way I imagine a skeptical auditor studies a suspicious invoice. The stories are already exaggerating, I told her. I would rather you judge what I actually am than what people are saying I am. That is either very wise or very dangerous, she said, falling into step beside me. I have not decided which yet. Rook walked ahead of us, scouting the trail out of old habit, while Sable kept pace at my other side, alert in the particular way she got whenever we left our own territory. Denna had stayed behind this time, at Sable's insistence, since a delegation of 5 would have looked less like a conversation and more like a raiding party. I do not like walking into another chief's fire without knowing his temper first, Sable said, low enough that only I could hear it. Rook says Draven lost good hunting ground to us a generation back. Grudges like that do not simply expire because the men who held them have grown old. I am aware, I said. I intend to give him nothing to add to that grudge today. Mira glanced sideways at me as we walked, curiosity briefly winning out over caution. You speak of grudges and negotiations like a merchant, not a warrior or a shaman, she said. Where I come from, that combination is rare enough to be either very useful or very suspicious. Where I come from, I said, that combination was simply called doing my job well. Nobody worshipped me for it either. She studied my face for a moment, clearly filing the answer away rather than accepting or rejecting it outright, which I was beginning to recognize as her particular way of reserving judgment. We crossed into the neighboring tribe's territory an hour later, met at the boundary stones by an armed escort who did not bother pretending they were merely curious. They walked us to their chief's fire in tense silence, and I used every step of it to steady the argument I intended to make. Chief Draven was older than Voss, weathered in a way that spoke of decades surviving winters rather than decades profiting off other people's, and he did not stand when we arrived, which I understood immediately as a deliberate insult meant to establish the shape of the conversation before a single word was spoken. So this is the false god my hunters keep whispering about, he said, looking me over with open contempt, a pup barely weaned, claiming powers no ancestor ever granted a beastman. I am not claiming to be a god, I said, before Sable could answer for me. I have never claimed that. Other people started calling me one, and I have spent every day since trying to correct them. Draven's eyes narrowed, clearly expecting either fear or bluster, and finding neither. Then what do you claim? He said. I claim to have a strange ability that brings certain things from somewhere far away, I said. Water once, fire once, tools when my own people needed them badly enough. I do not control it fully. It does not answer every request, and it has never once given me power over anyone who did not choose to trust me first. Draven turned to Mira, clearly more willing to hear a spiritual judgment than a runt's self-defense. You are the pack speaker to the ancestors, he said. Tell me honestly, do you believe this creature is touched by something real or merely clever? Mira did not answer immediately. She studied me for a long moment, the kind of study that felt heavier than Draven's contempt had, because I understood she was the one person here whose answer could actually cost me everything I had built. I do not know if it is the ancestors, she said finally, choosing each word with visible care. I know that whatever gave him this gift did not make him boastful with it. I have watched false prophets before, Chief. They demand worship first and prove nothing after. This one proved things first, small things, honest things, and only afterward did the tribe start calling him something he never asked to be called. Draven considered that, unconvinced but no longer openly hostile. Words are cheap, he said, even honest ones. Show me something, or leave my territory having wasted both our time. I felt the old panic rise, the same instinct that had once made me beg the system for anything at all in front of a branding iron. I pushed it down and asked instead, carefully, exactly what I could safely afford to show a hostile audience without spending trust I could not yet replace. Interworld Courier System. Stated delivery request. Anything safe to demonstrate publicly, I thought. Nothing that risks more than I can currently afford to lose. Delivery available. Item, 1 signal mirror, polished glass and metal frame. Weight, 200 grams. Trust credit required. 1 unit. Approved. A small mirror appeared in my palm, simple, catching the firelight in a way that would have looked unremarkable in my old world, and looked exactly like a miracle here. I held it up, angled toward the sun breaking through the tree line, and threw a bright, clean spot of light across Draven's own chest. Deliberate, controlled, nothing violent or threatening about it. This is not a weapon, I said. It is a signal. 2 watchers a hillside apart could speak to each other in daylight without a single runner risking the distance between them. That is not a miracle either. It is simply a tool nobody here has had reason to build yet. Draven stared at the mirror for a long moment, turning it over once Sable passed it to him, testing its weight, its clarity, the strange evenness of its surface. This is finer glass than any of our traders carry, he said, quieter now, some of the hostility drained out of his voice. It comes from very far away, I said. I cannot promise you more of them. I can promise you that whatever I bring honestly, and I will never ask your people to worship me for it. One of Draven's advisors, an older man with a hunting scar across one cheek, leaned close to whisper something in his chief's ear. Draven waved him off without breaking his focus on me. My advisor thinks this is a trick meant to weaken us before an invasion, Draven said, bluntly, as if daring me to react. Tell me why he is wrong. Because an invasion would need soldiers, weapons, and numbers I do not have, I said. What I have is a starving tribe that just stopped starving, and a slave trader who will come back angrier than either of us can currently afford. I am not here to threaten you. I am here because I would rather have one fewer enemy while I deal with the one I already have. Draven's expression flickered at the mention of Voss, something like recognition passing behind his eyes. The trader Voss has approached my territory before, he admitted, slower now. He offered gold for information about weakened tribes. I refused him. Perhaps that refusal is the real reason he turned his attention to your valley instead. That was the first piece of real information I had gotten all day, and I filed it away carefully instead of reacting to it visibly. Did he say why he wanted that information? I asked, keeping my voice level despite how badly I wanted the details. Draven's advisor answered before his chief could, clearly deciding that some information cost him nothing to share with a rival he no longer considered an immediate threat. He spoke of expanding his trade routes north, the advisor said the Beastman tribes along this valley were too scattered and too proud to ever unite against him. He may not have expected either of you to still be standing this deep into winter. Then, he has already underestimated us twice, Sable said quietly, with the particular satisfaction of someone filing away a useful insult for later. Then we have more in common than either of us expected an hour ago, I said. Draven looked between me, Sable, Rook, and Mira for a long silent moment, weighing something none of us could see directly. I do not believe in gods born as the runt of a starving pack, he said finally. But I have seen enough liars in my years to recognize when one is not standing in front of me. You may keep your valley and your strange gift without my tribe treating it as a threat. That is the most I will offer today. It is more than enough, I said, and meant it. We stayed at his fire only long enough for a brief, careful meal, tense, but no longer hostile, before making the long walk back toward our own territory. Mira walked beside me for most of the return journey, quieter than she had been on the way out. I did not lie to him back there, she said eventually. I do not know what you are. I only know what I have watched you do, and it does not match the shape of every false prophet I have studied since I was a child learning this role. That is the most honest compliment anyone has given me since I woke up in this body, I told her. She almost smiled at that, the expression looking as unfamiliar on her as Sable's had weeks earlier. "Do not mistake my caution for devotion," she said. "I intend to keep watching you closely. If you are what I hope you might be, that watching will cost you nothing. If you are not, I intend to be the first person in this tribe to say so." "I would expect nothing less from someone the elders trust with matters this important," I said, and I meant that too. Rook fell into step on my other side as the fire circle of Draven's camp faded behind us into the trees. "You did not need a warrior today after all," he said, sounding faintly amused despite himself. "Just a mirror and a very patient tongue." "Some fights are not worth winning with a blade," I said. This was one of them. He grunted at that, the same grudging sound he had given the snares, and I was starting to recognize it now as his particular way of agreeing without admitting he had changed his mind. We reached our own valley as the sun was setting, tired but intact, the alliance secured without a single drop of blood spilled to buy it. Sable clapped a hand on my shoulder as we crossed back into familiar ground, the closest thing to open affection I had seen from her yet. "You turned a hostile chief into a cautious neighbor, with a mirror and honest words," she said. "That is worth more than a dozen warriors could have won us today." I was already turning toward the storehouse instead, some old habit from my previous life, refusing to let a long day end without checking the numbers first, the way I used to walk past the warehouse floor one more time before finally heading home. That habit was the only reason I noticed it immediately. The storehouse door, secured that morning before we left, hung open on a single broken hinge, and half the supplies Rook and I had spent 3 careful days gathering were simply gone. Sable's hand went to her knife before either of us had fully processed what we were looking at. Rook swore, low and furious, already crouching to examine tracks in the dirt near the threshold. "These are not raider tracks," he said, after a long moment of careful study. "Raiders do not know which crates hold the salted meat and which hold empty baskets. Whoever did this knew exactly where to look." Mira went very still beside me, the same stillness I had seen in Sable's ears the night the lighter first sparked. "That means someone inside this tribe told them where to look," she said quietly, saying out loud the thing none of us wanted to say first. I stood in the doorway of our half-emptied storehouse, the goodwill of an entire day's diplomacy suddenly feeling very small against the much closer, much colder problem of a thief who already knew our valley better than any hostile chief ever could. Sable posted guards at every remaining entrance before the sun had fully set, tight-jawed and furious in the quiet, controlled way that I was learning meant she was more dangerous than when she shouted. Rook cataloged what remained by torchlight, calling out losses in a flat voice that could not quite hide how much the theft had cost him personally, given how many of those hours in the tree line had been his. Mira crouched at the threshold long after the others had moved on to counting crates, studying the broken hinge and the scattered dirt with an attention that looked less like grief and more like the beginning of an investigation. "Whoever did this was careful," she said, when I finally crouched beside her. "No panic in these tracks, no wasted motion. This was not a raid. This was an errand, run by someone who knew exactly how much time they had before we returned." "That is a worse thought than an outside enemy," I said. "It is the only honest one available right now," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her knees. "An outside enemy we can see coming. This one has already been standing beside us, possibly for longer than one evening." I did not sleep well that night, turning over every face in the tribe I had come to trust over these past weeks, hating how quickly a single broken hinge had turned warmth into suspicion, and hating even more that the suspicion was almost certainly justified. We spent 3 days trying to answer a question that should have been simple and turned out to be anything but. Whoever had emptied our storehouse had known exactly which crates mattered, which meant they were either watching us closely from outside the tribe, or they were already standing among us, close enough to see everything, and trusted enough that nobody thought to watch them back. I did not want to believe the second possibility. Rook clearly did not either, judging by how aggressively he threw himself into tracking the outside option instead. "Footprints lead toward the ridge trail," he reported on the second morning, kneeling over a faint impression in the frost near the tree line. "Boot shape, not paw. Human, not beastman. That much I can promise you." "Human," I repeated, "not one of ours." "Someone wearing human boots," Mira corrected gently. "That is not quite the same claim. Boots can be traded, borrowed, or stolen just as easily as grain." She was right, and it frustrated me exactly as much as it should have. I had spent years reading supply chain fraud reports back in my old life, and the pattern here felt uncomfortably familiar. A theft clean enough to suggest inside knowledge, but staged just messily enough to point blame somewhere convenient. I do not think we solve this by tracking boot prints alone, I said, at the evening fire where Sable, Rook, and Mira had gathered to compare what little we had found. We need someone who can look at what was actually taken and tell us why, not just where the tracks lead. That is when Tessa spoke up for the first time since I had arrived in this tribe, from the edge of the fire circle where she usually stayed quiet among the other artisans. I can tell you why, she said, standing and walking closer without waiting to be invited. Whoever did this did not take everything valuable. They took specific things. The preserved meat, yes, that makes sense for hunger, but they also took 2 of your delivered snares and left the salt block behind entirely. I had not noticed that detail myself, too focused on the missing food to catalog the missing tools separately. Why does that matter? I asked. Because salt is common enough that any trader would recognize it instantly, she said. But your snares are not. The wire is finer than anything our smiths forge, and whoever took them either wanted to study how they were made or wanted to prove to someone else that such wire exists here at all. I studied her for a long moment. She was older than most of the artisans I had met so far, hands rough with old burn scars from forge work, eyes sharp with the particular impatience of someone who had spent years being right about craftsmanship and rarely being asked her opinion first. You sound very certain of that reading, I said. I have spent 20 years comparing what people claim to have made against what their hands actually prove they can make, she said. Whoever stole your snares was not hungry, they were curious, or they were reporting to someone else who was. Sable's ears flattened at the implication. Reporting to whom? She asked. Tessa shrugged, an economical gesture that cost her nothing and revealed nothing either. That is not a question my trade answers. That is a question for whoever tracks people instead of metal. I appreciated her honesty about the limits of her own expertise, almost as much as the insight itself. It was rare in my experience for a skilled person to admit clearly where their competence actually ended. Would you be willing to look at the wire itself if we ever recover any of it? I asked. Tell us more about who might have made or wanted it. Tessa considered the offer for a long moment, glancing toward Rook and Sable as if weighing whether this runt's request carried any real authority behind it. I do not believe in gods, she said finally. I believe in good craftsmanship and honest payment. If you can promise me both, I will look at whatever you bring me. I can promise you honesty, I said. I am working on whether the payment can be more than gratitude just yet. That answer, oddly, seemed to satisfy her more than an extravagant promise would have. She nodded once, sharp and businesslike, and returned to her seat at the edge of the fire circle without further comment. Later that evening, once the others had drifted off to their own fires, Tessa found me again on her own terms, sitting down across from me with the deliberate air of someone who had decided a private conversation mattered more than an audience. I have watched 3 prior chiefs make promises to my workshop over the years, she said. Every one of them called their gifts miraculous and asked me to simply trust the miracle instead of examining it. You are the first to hand me something and let me take it apart with my own hands. That is because I do not fully understand it myself, I said. I would rather have you find the actual limits of what I bring than have either of us pretend it is magic neither of us can question. She studied me with something that was not quite warmth yet, but was no longer pure skepticism either. Bring me something broken sometime, she said, not something that works perfectly. I learn more from a failure I can take apart than from a miracle I am only allowed to admire. I will remember that, I told her, and I meant it, filing away the offer as something closer to an alliance than a passing comment. The investigation continued over the following 2 days without producing a name, only a growing shape of a theory none of us liked. The stolen items pointed outward, towards someone gathering intelligence rather than simple food, and the timing pointed uncomfortably close to home, given how precisely the thief had known when the storehouse would sit unguarded. Interworld Courier System, Trust Credit Stable, no advancement condition currently available for resolution. The system's silence on this particular problem told me something important. Whatever this deficiency actually was, it was not a hunger or safety category the system recognized directly. It was something more like betrayal, and betrayal, apparently, was not a problem I could simply deliver my way out of. Mira found me alone by the fire on the 3rd night, her expression carrying the particular weight of someone about to share something they had been sitting with reluctantly. I overheard something today, she said, quiet enough that only I could hear it, not proof, only a whisper, and whispers are dangerous things to repeat without care. Tell me anyway, I said. I would rather weigh an uncertain whisper myself than have you decide for me what I am allowed to hear. She hesitated, then spoke. One of the younger tribe members mentioned, in passing, having seen someone near the storehouse the night before it was emptied, someone who had no obvious reason to be there. They did not name who. I did not press, because I did not want to turn a passing comment into an accusation before we had anything solid to stand on. That was not a name. It was barely even a shape, but it confirmed the fear I had been avoiding since Rook first knelt over those boot prints. That whoever had done this was close enough to walk our own paths without anyone questioning their presence. We will find out who, eventually, I said, more to convince myself than her. But we cannot accuse anyone on a whisper. That destroys trust faster than the theft itself did. Mira nodded, relieved, I think, that I had reached the same conclusion she had been hoping for, rather than pushing her to name a suspect before either of us was certain. Sable was less patient with the uncertainty than either of us, pacing the length of the storehouse the next morning, like a caged thing. I do not like waiting for a name to reveal itself, she said. I would rather post a guard on every fire and watch everyone at once until the thief slips. That will tell them we suspect someone inside the tribe, I said. If they are careful enough to leave no more evidence than boot prints and a stolen coil of wire, they are careful enough to stop entirely the moment they realize we are watching. Better to let them believe they succeeded cleanly and catch them the next time they reach for more. Sable did not like that answer, but she did not argue with it either, which I was learning was her particular way of trusting a plan she had not chosen herself. In the meantime, another problem sat waiting, one that felt smaller only because it had been waiting longer. Rook mentioned it almost as an afterthought while we walked the tree line checking the snares that remained. There's a scout from the old days, he said. Rin. She used to run messages and watch trade routes for us before Voss's people captured her on a supply run 2 seasons back. I have heard she is still alive, still enslaved, somewhere in his territory. Why has nobody tried to free her? I asked. Because 2 seasons ago, we did not have anyone who could talk an armed overseer into backing down without bloodshed, Rook said. Matter of fact, no accusation in it, only an observation. Now, perhaps, we do. I turned that over as we walked. The theft investigation still unsolved behind us, a new rescue now sitting in front of us. And I understood without needing anyone to explain it further that both problems were connected to the same source, waiting at the other end of whatever roads led back toward Cassian Voss. That evening, I asked the system directly whether it could help with a rescue the way it had helped with hunger, half expecting another flat refusal. Interworld Courier System. Stated delivery request. Anything useful for freeing a captive without violence, I thought, choosing my words carefully. Something that helps us move unseen or helps her escape once we reach her. Delivery available. Item, 1 coil of thin rope, weight limit compliant. Delivery available. Item, 1 small metal file, weight limit compliant. Trust credit required, 2 units combined. Current trust credit, 2 units, approved. A coil of rope and a slim file appeared in my palm. Unremarkable objects that would have meant nothing on a hardware store shelf back home and meant everything now, given what they might make possible. Sable examined the rope's weave with a critical eye, testing its strength between 2 hands. This will hold a person's weight over rough ground, she said, sounding almost surprised. Where you find such useful things, I still do not fully understand, but I am no longer questioning whether to use them. Rook took the file, turning it over once before nodding slowly. This cuts iron faster than anything we currently own, he said. If she is chained rather than simply guarded, this could matter more than either of us realizes yet. I studied the 2 small objects laid out between us, the sum total of what the system had allowed for a rescue that would matter more to this tribe than any diplomatic mirror or any hunting snare had so far. Then we planned the extraction carefully, I said. Not rushed, not desperate. Voss's men underestimated us once already. I would rather they keep underestimating us a little longer before we prove exactly how wrong that assumption is. Mira watched the rope and file with an expression I could not quite read, somewhere between hope and old grief. Rin was kind to me when I was younger, she said quietly. She used to bring me feathers from the far ridge because she knew I collected them for the shrine. I have thought of her more often than I have said aloud these past 2 seasons. Then we bring her home, I said. Not because the system demands it, because she is owed that much, regardless of what any tier or trust credit says about it. Mira did not answer, but the look she gave me then stayed with me longer than any of Draven's grudging respect or Rook's earned approval had. The particular gratitude of someone finally allowed to hope for something they had quietly given up asking for. Rook found the caravan's route 2 days after we decided to try the rescue, tracking rumors through a chain of cautious traders who owed him old favors from before the tribe's fortunes had changed. She is being moved, he reported, crouched at our small planting fire with a stick sketching rough lines in the dirt, not to Voss's usual holding pens. A caravan heading east toward a permanent buyer. If we do not act before it reaches the crossroads 3 days from now, we lose the chance entirely. 3 days was not much time to plan an extraction against armed guards, but it was more than Ren had probably expected anyone to give her at all after 2 seasons of captivity. Sable wanted to move immediately, with force, and I understood the instinct even while I argued against it. A direct assault risks her life as much as it risks ours, I said. If guards panic during a fight, a chained captive is the easiest target to silence quickly. We need something quieter. Mira, unexpectedly, was the one who proposed the shape of the plan that eventually worked. She had grown up near the eastern trade paths before joining our tribe shrine, and she remembered a narrow ravine the caravan route was forced to cross, slow going, even for guards paying full attention. If we time it during that crossing, she said, the guards will be split, half ahead, half behind, neither group able to see the other clearly. That is when a captive becomes hardest to watch and easiest to reach. We spent the following 2 days preparing as carefully as 3 days allowed. Rook scouting the ravine itself, Sable drilling the small extraction party on signals that would not carry sound past the tree line, myself testing exactly what the system would and would not provide for an operation this dangerous. Dinah practiced the hand signals with more focus than I expected from someone who had only recently stopped being a captive herself, snapping through the sequence twice before Sable was satisfied. You do not have to come, Sable told her quietly, during a pause in the drills. Nobody would think less of you for staying behind, given what you went through with Voss's overseer. That is exactly why I'm coming, Dinah said. I know what it feels like standing in that line, waiting for someone else to decide whether you matter. I would rather be the one reaching into that line for someone else this time. Sable did not argue further after that, and I understood, watching them, that this rescue had already started meaning something different to each of us long before we ever reached the ravine. I asked for a weapon on the final night before we moved, more out of caution than confidence that the request would succeed. Inner World Courier System, stated delivery request. Anything that helps if this goes wrong, I thought. A blade, something to defend with, if it comes to that. Request denied. Weapon class items exceed current trust tier authorization. Tribe defensive capacity insufficient to justify unlock at present rank. I stared into the dark for a long moment after that answer, more unsettled by the refusal than I expected to be. The system had given me water for a dying pup and a mirror for a hostile chief without hesitation. It would not give me so much as a knife for a rescue that might genuinely require one. Sable, when I told her, took the news better than I did. Then we plan around exactly what we have, she said. A rope, a file, and each other. I have fought with less before. We moved before dawn on the third day, 5 of us total. Sable, Rook, Mira, myself, and Dinah, who had insisted on coming despite Sable's initial reluctance, arguing correctly that an extra set of capable hands mattered more right now than caution about numbers. The ravine crossing looked exactly as Mira had described it, narrow enough that the caravan's guards had to funnel through in a loose line, half already across before the rest had entered. We waited in the brush at the ravine's midpoint, watching the captive shuffle past, chained wrists, downcast eyes, the particular exhausted posture of people who had stopped expecting rescue a long time ago. I found Ren near the middle of the line, thinner than I expected from Rook's description, but alert in a way the other captives were not, eyes tracking the guards' positions with the sharp calculation of someone still looking for an opening, even after 2 seasons of captivity. Rook gave the signal, and Sable moved first, silent and precise, dropping the nearest guard before he could call out. I moved to Ren directly, the file already in hand, working at the lock on her chains as quickly as my untrained fingers allowed. You are the runt everyone is whispering about, she said, quiet and disbelieving even as I worked. The one who talks slave traders into retreating. Word travels faster than I expected, I said, still working the file against iron. She studied me while I worked, calculating something behind her exhausted eyes. Then, let me help you finish this properly, she said. Before I make you responsible for a rescue you cannot actually complete alone. She gave me directions in short, precise bursts, information gathered from 2 seasons of careful watching that no map or scout report could have provided. The second chain link, not the first. The guard captain carries the master key, not the lieutenant. The eastern path floods this time of year. Do not use it for the retreat. Between her knowledge and our small team's careful planning, the chains came free faster than I expected, and we were moving back into the tree line before the guards ahead of the ravine had even registered that something behind them had gone wrong. We did not stop running until the caravan's noise had faded entirely behind us, deep into territory Rook knew well enough to lose any pursuit that might eventually follow. Rin collapsed against a tree once we finally slowed, not from exhaustion alone, I think, but from the particular disbelief of someone allowing themselves to feel safe for the first time in longer than she could probably remember clearly. Why? She asked, once she had caught her breath. Why risk this much for someone your tribe has not seen in 2 seasons? Because you are still ours, Mira said. Before I could answer, kneeling beside her with something fierce and grateful in her expression. Because we should have come sooner and did not, and that is a debt worth paying even this late. Ren looked between all of us for a long moment, settling last on me, studying my small, unclawed frame with open skepticism. You do not look like someone capable of any of this, she said. I am not, I admitted. Everyone else here did the actual rescuing. I mostly filed a lock and hoped the plan worked. That answer, oddly, seemed to earn more trust from her than any confident claim would have. She almost smiled, the expression sitting strangely on a face that had clearly not had much reason to use it recently. I know the routes Voss's caravans use, she said slowly, like she was testing whether the offer would be taken seriously. I know which guards drink too much on watch, and which ones report every detail back faithfully. If your tribe intends to keep surviving him, that knowledge is worth more than gratitude. Then stay, I said, not as a debt repaid, as someone we would genuinely value having with us. She considered that for a long moment before finally nodding, slow and deliberate, the decision of someone who had learned the hard way not to trust offers too quickly, but had decided, cautiously, that this one might be different. Interworld Courier System, Trust Credit, updated. Rescue objective, verified. Companion registration, confirmed. The system's flat acknowledgement felt almost anticlimactic against the weight of what had just happened. 5 people risking everything for one captive's freedom, succeeding through nothing more dramatic than careful planning and a stolen coil of wire the system had allowed weeks earlier for an entirely different purpose. We rested 1 full day in a hidden hollow before making the final push home, and it was there, away from the tribe's watching eyes, that Rin finally let some of her guard down for the first time. I used to run messages between 3 tribes before Voss's men took me, she said, staring into a small fire Rook had risked lighting deep enough in the trees to hide its glow. I knew every safe path, every dangerous crossing, every guard rotation worth avoiding. Then 1 bad crossing, 1 careless morning, and 2 seasons disappeared into someone else's ledger, as if I had never existed outside it. I am sorry that happened to you, I said, meaning it more plainly than I usually allowed myself to mean anything. Do not apologize for a man you have never even met properly, she said, though not unkindly. Apologize by making sure it stops happening to the next person he decides is worth less than the profit. That is the plan, I told her. I do not know yet how far I can push it. I know I do not intend to stop pushing. She studied me again in the firelight, something shifting behind her guarded expression. Not full trust yet, but the beginning of a willingness to consider it. We returned to the valley 2 days later, tired, intact, 1 companion richer than we had left. The celebration that greeted us was smaller than I expected, muted by exhaustion, but real in a way that felt more solid than the earlier crowds calling me a god ever had. Not everyone celebrated equally, though. I noticed it first in small things. A few tribe members holding back from the fire, where Rin, Mira, Sable, and I sat together. Murmurs I could not quite catch carried on the wind toward other, smaller fires, where the mood felt distinctly less warm. Rook noticed it too, watching the divided camp with a frown I recognized from the early days of his own skepticism. Careful, Runt, he said, low enough for only me to hear. 5 companions gathered close around you is a comfort to some and a grievance to others. Not everyone in this tribe is being asked to share your fire, and people notice what they are not offered as sharply as they notice what they are given. I looked across the valley at the smaller, quieter fires and understood, with a familiar sinking feeling, that solving one problem this cleanly had already begun quietly creating the shape of the next one. The complaint reached the council fire 8 days after we brought Ren home, carried there by a middle-aged tanner named Osk, who had never spoken to me directly before that morning. 4 companions eat at the Runt's fire every night, he said, standing before the assembled elders with his arms crossed. Meanwhile, the rest of us share what is left after the hunters take their portion and the smiths take theirs. I do not begrudge Sable her rank or Rook his kills. I begrudge a system that seems to reward whoever stands closest to the one everyone is calling a god. I had known something like this was coming since Rook's warning the night we returned with Ren, but hearing it stated plainly in front of the whole council still landed harder than I expected. That is not entirely fair, Sable said, her voice controlled despite the tension in her shoulders. Nobody eats extra because they stand near Kai. They eat what they are given, same as everyone else. Osk did not back down. Perceptions matter as much as portions, war leader, he said. 5 names get spoken together at every fire now, while the rest of this tribe goes back to being simply the pack, unnamed, unremarkable, feeding whatever the Runt's favorites need to keep working their miracles. I felt the old instinct rise, the urge to simply explain my way past the accusation, the way I had talked down Voss's overseer or Chief Draven's suspicion. I made myself sit with the discomfort instead, because Osk was not an enemy negotiating in bad faith. He was a tribe member, raising a fair question in front of witnesses, and treating him like an opponent would only prove his point. "You are right to raise this," I said finally, once the murmuring around the fire had quieted enough to hear me. "I have not been distributing attention fairly, because every problem I have solved so far happened to need Sable's strength, or Rook's tracking, or Mira's standing with our neighbors, or Ren's knowledge of Voss's roots. That is not favoritism. That is simply who has been useful for each specific crisis. But I understand how it looks from outside that pattern, and I understand why it worries you." Osk's expression shifted slightly, surprised, I think, that I had not simply dismissed him. "Then what do you propose?" he asked. "I do not have a perfect answer yet," I said honestly, "but I propose we let the council decide how food and resources are distributed going forward, not me alone, and not based on who happens to be standing at my fire on a given night. I would rather have fair rules that constrain me too, than rules that only apply to everyone else." An elder named Finn, older than Yura, spoke up from the far side of the fire, voice raspy with age, but carrying clearly across the gathered tribe. "That is a reasonable offer," she said, "but offers mean little without follow-through. We will watch closely whether the runt's fair words become fair practice, or simply another clever answer that cost him nothing tonight and changes nothing tomorrow." "I accept that watching," I said. "I would rather be held to a standard than simply trusted on faith." The council spent the rest of that evening drafting a distribution charter, tedious work that had nothing to do with system tiers or trust credit, purely the practical business of deciding how a growing tribe fed itself fairly, regardless of who its members happened to be close to. I sat through every argument, offering opinions only when asked, letting Osk, Finn, and the other elders shape rules that would apply to me exactly as much as to anyone else. Ren watched the proceedings with visible surprise, leaning toward Mira at one point to murmur something I only caught the end of. "Every camp I served before this one settled disputes with a blade or a decree," she said, when I asked her about it afterward. "I did not expect a council of tanners and elders to out-argue a war leader and win." "That is rather the point of it," I told her. "Nobody wins by rank here. They win by making the better case in front of people who are allowed to disagree." She considered that for a long moment, then admitted quietly that it was the first governance she had witnessed in years that did not make her flinch in anticipation of a punishment. Sable found me afterward, exhausted from the long council session, sitting alone by the fire that had started this whole difficult evening. "You did not fight that accusation," she said. "I expected you to argue your way out of it, the way you argued Voss's overseer into retreat." "Osk was not lying to hurt me," I said. "He was telling an uncomfortable truth because he cared enough about fairness to risk speaking it in front of the whole council. Arguing with that would have only proven I did not deserve the trust I keep asking everyone to extend me." Sable considered that for a long moment, then allowed herself something rare, a small, genuine smile. "That is a different kind of strength than I expected from someone who talks his way out of every crisis," she said. "I am beginning to think the talking is not the whole trick. It is knowing when not to use it." Ren, sitting slightly apart from the rest of us as she often did, spoke up unexpectedly from the shadow at the fire's edge. "I have served under leaders who would have punished Osk for speaking against them publicly," she said. "You listened instead. That matters more than you probably realize, to people who remember what the alternative looks like." The charter the council finalized that night was imperfect, the way any first attempt at fairness usually is, but it held. And over the following days, I watched something shift subtly in the tribe's mood. The murmuring quieted, the smaller fires drew closer to the larger ones again, and Osk himself nodded to me once, briefly, the following morning, which I understood as close to an apology as his pride would allow him to offer directly. I made a point of eating at a different fire each night after that, deliberately, not performing fairness so much as actually practicing it, sitting with tanners and weavers, and the elderly who had never once been part of any dramatic rescue or negotiation. Most conversations were small and unremarkable. Complaints about the cold, questions about whether the neighboring tribe's alliance would hold, requests to hear the mirror story again from someone who had not been present for it. I found I did not mind the smallness of it. My old job had been full of unremarkable days too, and I had learned then that the unremarkable days were usually where the actual trust got built, one honest conversation at a time, long before any crisis arrived to test whether that trust was real. Interworld Courier System. Governance stability recorded. No direct trust credit adjustment. Advisory note. Sustained internal cohesion improves future advancement conditions across all categories. That was the first time the system had offered anything resembling advice rather than a flat transactional report, and I found myself oddly grateful for even that small acknowledgement that fairness, not just usefulness, mattered to whatever was keeping score on the other end of this strange arrangement. Tessa, of all people, was the one who pulled me aside the evening before the rider arrived, her expression uncharacteristically hesitant for someone usually so blunt. "I have heard the same complaint Osk raised," she said, "though from a different angle. Some of the younger artisans think I have been given special standing in your workshop plans that they have not earned." I told them the truth, that I earned it by being right about the wire theft when nobody else could explain it, but I wanted you to hear that from me directly, rather than through another council fire. "I appreciate that," I said. "For what it is worth, I do not think standing near me should ever replace earning your own place. If anyone challenges that publicly, I would rather answer it the same way I answered Osk, honestly, and without hiding behind rank." Tessa studied me for a moment, then gave one of her rare, approving nods. "That is the correct answer," she said. "Do not let success make you forget it." The peace did not last more than a handful of days after that conversation before a new problem arrived, carried this time not by a tribe member's grievance, but by a stranger on horseback, a rider wearing colors I did not recognize, requesting an audience on behalf of a magistrate, claiming legal authority over the very land our valley sat upon. The magistrate arrived 3 days after his rider's warning, traveling with a modest escort and a young woman I did not recognize, introduced only as an observer sent to record the proceedings honestly for interested parties. "I am Magistrate Hollis," he announced, once Sable and I had gathered the council to receive him. "I represent the Crown's interest in unclaimed and improperly settled territories. This valley falls within a grant issued 11 years ago to a landholder whose interest I now administer. Your tribe's presence here constitutes trespass unless you can produce a counterclaim." I had expected threats. I had not expected paperwork, which somehow felt more dangerous, precisely because it wore the appearance of fairness while potentially hiding something far less fair underneath. "We have lived in this valley for 3 generations, Sable said, controlled fury barely masked beneath her formal tone. "No landholder has ever set foot here in my lifetime or my mother's." Hollis produced a scroll, sealed with wax stamped in a crest I did not recognize, and unrolled it with theatrical care. "The grant predates your residency," he said. "Possession without documented title means nothing under the Crown's law, regardless of how many generations occupied the land in ignorance of its true ownership." I studied the document from where I stood, close enough to see the wax seal, but not close enough to examine it properly. Something about the whole presentation nagged at me, the same instinct that used to flag a supplier invoice as suspicious before I could articulate exactly why. "May I examine the seal directly?" I asked. Hollis hesitated, just slightly, before handing it over with visible reluctance. I turned it in my hands, and it was the young observer, standing quietly at the edge of the gathering, who spoke first, surprising everyone, including, I think, herself. "The wax has been reset," she said, quiet but clear enough to carry. "See the discoloration along the seal's edge? Fresh wax poured over an older impression leaves exactly that kind of ring. I have seen my uncle's clerks do this before, when a document needed to look older than it actually was." Every head turned toward her, including the magistrate's, whose composure slipped for the first time since his arrival. "Elowin," he said sharp, warning. "I am simply describing what I observe," she said, meeting his glare without flinching, though her hands were not quite steady at her sides. "If the seal is genuine, an honest examination should prove that clearly enough. If it is not, I would rather this tribe know it now than discover it too late." I looked between the magistrate's rising anger and this young woman's carefully controlled nerve and understood, with a jolt, exactly whose name I had just heard attached to hers. "Your uncle," I said, carefully. "Would that be Cassian Voss?" The silence that followed answered the question more completely than her words could have. "He does not know I am here in this capacity," she said, finally, quietly. "I was sent to observe on behalf of his broader trading interests, since a land dispute here would benefit him, regardless of who technically won it. I did not expect to find myself unable to stay silent about an obvious forgery." Sable's hand went to her weapon, old habit reasserting itself at the mention of Voss's name attached to anyone standing in our council circle. I raised a hand before the tension could escalate further. "Let her finish," I said. "An honest observation from an inconvenient source is still honest." Tessa, who had been quietly examining the scroll's parchment while the confrontation unfolded, spoke up next, her tone carrying the particular certainty of someone who had spent decades calibration for a living. This parchment is not 11 years old, she said. The fiber treatment matches batches I have seen from workshops operating within the last 2 years. An older grant would show yellowing consistent with proper aging, not this uniform cream color throughout. Hollis's face had gone from confident to visibly strained, calculating, I imagine, how many witnesses had just watched his claim collapse in real time. This is preposterous, he said too loudly. The particular volume of someone trying to drown out an argument he could no longer win on facts alone. I will not stand here while an artisan and a trader's niece undermine a legally binding document. Then stand here while I ask a simpler question, I said. If this grant is genuine, produce the original registry record from the Crown's own archive confirming its issue date. A resealed copy proves nothing on its own. Hollis had no answer for that, only a long, furious silence that told the whole gathered council everything they needed to know. Rook, standing near the back of the gathering, allowed himself a rare open grin at the magistrate's discomfort. I have watched Kai talk down an overseer and a hostile chief now, he murmured to Denna beside him. Watching a magistrate's paperwork fail him in front of his own escort might be my favorite yet. The council voted unanimously to reject the claim before the sun had fully set, and Magistrate Hollis departed with considerably less confidence than he had arrived with, his escort trailing behind him in visible discomfort at how thoroughly the morning had gone wrong for their employer. Elowen remained behind after the others had left, standing uncertainly at the edge of our fire circle, like someone unsure whether she had just made an ally or an enemy of everyone present. You realize what you have just done, I said, quietly, once it was only the two of us and Sable within earshot. Your uncle will not be pleased to learn his observer exposed a forgery meant to serve his interests. I am aware, she said, some of her earlier composure cracking at last. I did not plan this. I only meant to watch quietly and report back. But watching a magistrate lie this openly, in front of people who had done nothing except live somewhere for 3 generations, I found I could not simply stay silent for the sake of my uncle's convenience. Sable studied her for a long moment, suspicion still evident but softening slightly at the edges. Why tell us any of this? She asked. You could have stayed silent about the seal and let the claim proceed. Nobody here would have known the difference. I would have known, Elowen said simply. That answer earned her a cautious welcome to sit at our fire a while longer, though I noticed Sable did not fully relax her guard, and I understood why. An honest moment from Voss's own niece was a valuable thing, but valuable things had a way of becoming complicated the longer you held on to them. Will you return to him? I asked her, once the fire had burned lower and the others had drifted toward their own rest. I do not know yet, she admitted. If I return and say nothing, I become complicit in whatever he plans next. If I do not return, he will know exactly why, and I do not think he forgives that kind of absence easily. Then stay a night, at least, I said. Decide with a clear head instead of a frightened one. Nobody here will force either choice on you. She looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable behind her carefully composed expression, before nodding once and settling closer to the fire. Not quite one of us yet, but no longer simply an observer either. Interworld Courier System. Legal threat neutralized through tribe-verified means. No trust credit adjustment. Advisory note. External informant relationships carry unresolved risk classification. The system's caution mirrored my own. Elowen's honesty tonight had cost her something real, and I did not yet know whether that cost would make her a genuine ally or simply a liability Voss would move quickly to silence once he learned what she had done. We had little time to consider the question further, because 2 days later, a different kind of danger arrived. This one with no magistrate's scroll or forged seal behind it, only the simple, physical failure of the very forge Tessa had spent weeks building to keep our growing tribe fed and equipped through the rest of the winter. Tessa had been pushing the new forge harder than usual for 3 straight days, trying to finish a batch of tools before the season's first heavy snow made travel to the tree line difficult, and I should have noticed sooner how thin her crew had stretched themselves to meet that deadline. I noticed instead only when the smoke started behaving wrong. We had built the forge into a narrow stone alcove for insulation, sensible in theory, but sensible only if the ventilation shaft above it stayed clear. It had not. A recent snowfall had partially collapsed the shaft's upper opening, without anyone realizing, and the overworked forge was now pouring smoke into an enclosed space with nowhere honest for it to escape. I smelled it before I saw it, thick and wrong, in a way that made my chest tighten even from the alcove's entrance. "Everyone out!" Tessa shouted, already moving toward the workers nearest the forge itself. But the narrow space and the single exit were working against her. 6 workers crowded near the back, where the air was worst, coughing, disoriented, one already sagging against the wall. I am not a fighter, and I am not a healer, but I understood immediately immediately what was actually killing people in that alcove, and it was not the flame itself. The forge fire was contained, controlled, exactly where it belonged. It was the smoke, trapped by the block shaft, thickening in a space too small for 6 panicking people to easily find their way out of. "Clear the shaft, not the flame," I shouted, pushing past Tessa toward the narrower service passage I remembered her mentioning during construction, a maintenance crawl space built for exactly this kind of failure, but rarely used. Tessa understood immediately, shouting instructions to redirect 2 of the stronger workers toward the crawl space, instead of wasting time trying to fight through the crowded main exit. I do not have the strength to physically pull anyone free, and I made myself useful the only way I could, staying low where the air remained breathable longest, guiding disoriented workers by voice toward the crawlspace opening, one at a time, instead of letting them bottleneck at the main door. Rook arrived within minutes, drawn by the commotion, and immediately understood the shape of the problem better than I could have explained it. "He is smaller and calmer," he called out, redirecting panicked workers with the same authority he used commanding a hunting party. "Follow him, not each other." We cleared the alcove within what felt like an impossibly long handful of minutes, though I suspect it was closer to 2 or 3. Tessa herself climbed onto the collapsed shaft opening once the last worker was clear, clearing packed snow and loose stone with her bare hands, until fresh air finally began drawing properly through the passage again. The forge fire itself never once threatened anyone directly. It was exactly where it belonged, doing exactly what a forge fire should do. The danger had always been the smoke, and the danger had always had an honest, physical cause that matched exactly what nearly killed 6 people in that enclosed space. 2 workers needed help breathing clearly again once we had them outside in the cold air, coughing and disoriented, but alive, and 1 had a minor burn from stumbling too close to unattended tools during the panic. But nobody died, and nobody lost more than a difficult hour to recover from what could have been a genuine tragedy. Rin, who had been sharpening tools nearby when the commotion started, helped carry 2 of the worst affected workers into open air. And it was her steady, practical presence afterward, checking pulses and breathing with the calm confidence of someone who had clearly tended emergencies before, that reassured the rest of the tribe faster than any reassuring words from me could have. I learned some healing out of necessity, running messages between camps that did not always welcome injured strangers kindly, she said, when I asked her about it afterward. It is not the same as Tessa's craft or Mira's remedies. It is only enough to keep someone breathing until better help arrives. That is not a small thing, I told her, watching her check one worker's pupils with practiced care. That may be the difference tonight between an accident and a tragedy. Tessa sat apart from the recovering workers afterward, staring at her own scorched and scraped hands with an expression I recognized immediately, the particular guilt of a competent person confronting a mistake that competence alone should have prevented. "I pushed the crew too hard," she said, when I sat down beside her. "I knew the shaft needed checking after that snowfall. I told myself it could wait 1 more day." "You did not cause the collapse," I said. "Winter did that. But you are right that the schedule pressure made it harder to catch in time. And that is worth learning from honestly, rather than either denying or drowning in." She nodded slowly, some of the guilt easing into something closer to resolve. "I want to rebuild the shaft properly," she said. "Wider, reinforced against snow load, checked daily regardless of deadline pressure. And I want a second exit cut into that alcove before we ever fire that forge again." "That sounds like exactly the right lesson to take from today," I said. "Interworld courier system, production deficiency crisis, resolved through tribe-operated correction, not delivered intervention, advancement condition met, production tier unlocked." The system's acknowledgement felt strange, given how close the crisis had come to genuine tragedy, but I understood, turning it over, that this was consistent with everything I had learned about it so far. It rewarded solved problems, not lucky outcomes. And today's problem had been solved by Tessa's own hands clearing that shaft, not by any convenient delivery from somewhere else. The rebuilt forge, completed 3 days later, with a properly reinforced shaft and a second exit exactly as Tessa had insisted, produced tools noticeably finer than the first batch had, evidence of lessons learned directly from near disaster rather than abstract improvement. Ella Wynn, who had stayed on at the valley in the days since the magistrate's failed claim, helped organize the rebuilding effort with an efficiency that surprised several of the artisans who had expected a trader's niece to know nothing of practical labor. "You are good at this," Tessa told her, grudging respect evident in her tone, the same tone she had once used admitting the delivered snares were well designed. "I spent years managing my uncle's supply ledgers," Elowin said. "Organizing labor and materials is not so different from organizing shipments, whatever the shipments happen to be." I noticed Sable watching this exchange with a complicated expression, not quite suspicion anymore, but not full trust either. She caught my eye afterward and voiced what I suspected she had been turning over for days. She is useful, Sable admitted. That does not make her safe. Voss will have noticed her absence by now. I know, I said. I do not have an answer for what happens when he does. I only know that turning her away now, after everything she has already risked to help us, feels like exactly the kind of unfairness I promised this council I would not practice. Sable did not argue further, but her watchfulness did not fully ease either, and I understood that some tensions in this tribe were not going to resolve as cleanly as a rebuilt forge shaft or a fair distribution charter. Rook found me at the valley's edge 2 days later, expression grim, in a way I had not seen from him since the morning Voss first threatened to brand me. Scouts report movement along the southern trade road, he said. Organized, armed, more men than any single trader would normally travel with. I believe Voss is done sending overseers and magistrates to test us quietly. I felt the old, cold certainty settle over me, the one I had first felt the morning Voss walked away from the branding post, promising to return. How long, I asked. Days, Rook said. Perhaps less. I would not wait to prepare until we are certain. I looked back toward the valley, toward the rebuilt forge and the fair council charter and the 5 companions who had each in their own way become essential to everything we had built here, and understood that all of it was about to be tested at once, in a way no clever negotiation or honest confession was going to be able to talk our way past. Voss came at dawn, 3 days after Rook's warning, with more men than I had let myself imagine, even in my worst calculations. I counted from the ridgeline, where Sable had positioned our watchers, rows of armed guards, mounted riders, and at the center, unmistakable even at this distance, Cassian Voss himself, riding forward this time instead of sending an overseer to test us on his behalf. He is not here to threaten us into compliance anymore, Sable said, beside me, her voice flat with the particular calm she reserved for moments too serious for anything else. He is here to end the argument permanently. We had spent the 3 days since Rook's warning, preparing as thoroughly as our small tribe could manage, reinforcing the palisade Tessa had helped design, positioning Rook's hunters where their aim would matter most, drilling every able-bodied tribe member on the evacuation routes Mira had mapped out for exactly this possibility. It was not enough. I understood that clearly within the first hour of the attack, watching Voss's forces press against defenses built by a tribe that had never fought a war of this scale before. Interworld Courier System. Emergency delivery requested. State request. Anything, I thought. Desperation cracking through careful strategy for the first time since the branding post. Anything that helps us survive this. Delivery available. Item, reinforced rope netting, useful for barricades. Weight and trust credit limits strained beyond comfortable margin. Trust credit depleting rapidly under current request volume. Warning, sustained emergency delivery may exhaust reserve entirely. I understood the warning even through the chaos. The system was not refusing me. It was telling me plainly that every delivery now cost more than it once had, that the safety net I had built across these past weeks was being spent faster than it could regenerate, and that I needed to choose carefully rather than simply demanding everything at once. Sable fought at the palisade's weakest point personally, meeting Voss's strongest fighters with a ferocity that reminded every watching tribe member exactly why she held her rank. Rook's hunters picked off approaching riders from cover with an efficiency born of years spent tracking far more cautious prey than armed soldiers. Rin moved through the chaos, guiding evacuating families along the exact routes she knew Voss's scouts would least expect anyone to use, her 2 seasons of captivity having taught her precisely how his people thought and moved. Mira worked among the wounded almost as soon as the first arrows fell, her shrine training turning quickly into battlefield triage, steady hands and steadier voice keeping frightened, injured tribe members calm enough to be moved to safety. Tessa, meanwhile, held the forge itself, directing a small, desperate crew reworking farm tools into makeshift barricades faster than I would have believed possible if I had not watched her do it. Elowen's contribution came at a moment I did not expect. She recognized, from years spent studying her uncle's tactical patterns, the exact signal his riders used to coordinate a final concentrated push, and she shouted the warning across our lines seconds before that push arrived, buying precious time for Sable's fighters to brace properly instead of being caught scattered. You know his methods better than any scout could, I told her, once the immediate danger of that particular assault had passed. I studied his ledgers for years, she said, breathless, eyes still tracking the battlefield, with the particular focus of someone calculating losses instead of celebrating a small victory. I never imagined that knowledge would someday save the people he intended to destroy. The fighting stretched through the entire day, brutal in a way none of our earlier confrontations with Voss's people had prepared me for. By mid-afternoon, fire had caught in the eastern storehouses. Whether from a stray arrow or deliberate sabotage, I could not immediately tell, and half our carefully rebuilt structures burned before Tessa's crew and a desperate bucket line could bring it fully under control. We lost people. I want to be honest about that, because pretending otherwise would dishonor what this day actually cost. 2 hunters from Rook's close circle did not survive the afternoon's fighting. Several more, tribe members and companions alike, carried wounds that would mark them for the rest of their lives. Dinah took an arrow to the shoulder defending a group of fleeing children, and though Mira's steady hands kept the wound from becoming fatal, the injury would slow her for months to come. Rook found me briefly during a lull in the fighting, blood on his hands that was not entirely his own, grief and fury warring plainly across his face. Tarek is gone, he said, naming one of the 2 hunters we had lost, a young man who had trained under Rook since before I ever arrived in this body. He died holding the eastern line so the healers could finish evacuating the children's shelter. I am sorry, I said, the words feeling small and useless against the weight of what he had just told me. Do not apologize yet, Rook said grim. Grieve with me later, when there is time for it. Right now, I need you focused on keeping the rest of us alive long enough to earn that grief honestly. I nodded, and we returned to the fighting, the loss folded away into a place I would have to open properly once the immediate danger had passed. I do not know exactly when the tide of the battle shifted, only that by evening, Voss's remaining forces were retreating rather than advancing, their momentum broken by a defense that had cost us dearly, but had cost them more than they apparently expected, a starving valley tribe to be capable of inflicting. Voss himself did not retreat quietly. He stood at the edge of the tree line as his surviving forces withdrew, staring back at the burning storehouses and the exhausted, bleeding tribe still standing despite everything he had thrown at us. This is not finished, he called out, voice carrying across the smoke-filled valley. You have won a battle, you have not won a war, and winter is coming, regardless of how many fires you managed to put out today. I did not answer him. I did not have the strength left to shape a clever response, and some part of me understood that no words were going to matter to him anymore. Not after today. Interworld Courier System. Trust credit critically depleted. Current tier. Courier tier 0. Rank D. Emergency reserve threshold reached. Recovery requires sustained tribe stability. I sat down heavily once the last of Voss's forces had fully withdrawn, surrounded by the wreckage of half our valley, watching Mira and the few healers we had move between the wounded with grim, exhausted determination. Sable found me there sometime after dark, her armor scored and dented, a shallow cut along one arm that she had not yet bothered to have tended. We held, she said quietly, more statement than celebration. We lost people, I said. We lost half the storehouse, most of the eastern wall, Tarek, and I do not know how many days it will take before this tribe can properly grieve everyone we lost today. We held, she repeated, more firmly this time. That is not nothing, Kai. A tribe with half its strength, facing that many men, could easily have been erased entirely today. It was not. That is because of decisions made weeks and months before today, not because of anything either of us managed in these last few hours alone. I looked around at what remained, the burned storehouse, the reinforced palisade still standing despite everything thrown against it, Tessa directing exhausted workers toward makeshift shelter for those who had lost their homes to the fire, Rin organizing a careful watch in case Voss attempted a second wave under cover of darkness, Mira still moving among the wounded with steady, tireless hands, Elowen helping carry water to those too exhausted to fetch their own. 5 companions, each doing exactly what their particular strength allowed, holding together a tribe that should have, by any honest accounting, been far easier to break than it had proven today. The core held, I said, finally, testing the words as much for myself as for Sable. We did not win cleanly, we are not whole, but we are still here, and Voss is not standing in this valley tonight. Sable nodded once, exhausted agreement rather than triumph, and sat down heavily beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched, neither of us finding the energy or the need to say anything further for a long while. Sometime near midnight, once the immediate crisis had settled into the grim, quiet work of caring for the wounded and accounting for the losses, Rook found me at the ruined edge of the eastern storehouse, staring at the wreckage with an expression I could not immediately read. This was not luck, he said, finally. Voss's forces knew exactly where our weakest defenses stood, exactly which paths led fastest to the eastern storehouse. That kind of precision does not come from simple scouting. I felt the cold certainty of understanding settle over me even before he finished the thought. Someone told him, I said. Someone close enough to know layouts we only finalized in the last 2 weeks, Rook confirmed, grim. I do not have a name yet, but I intend to find one, and soon, because whoever guided Voss's forces to our weakest points tonight is still standing somewhere among us, wearing whatever face they have worn all along. I looked out over the smoking ruins of Half Our Valley, the wounded still being tended, the 5 companions who had each fought and bled to hold this tribe together, and understood that even after surviving the worst single day since I had woken up in this small, unclawed body, the danger closest to home was not yet finished revealing itself. Mira found me last, near dawn, when even the healers had finally allowed themselves brief rest. She sat beside me without speaking for a long while, exhaustion and grief plain on her face in a way I had not seen from her before. "I have prayed over more of our dead tonight than in my entire time tending the shrine," she said finally. "I do not know if the ancestors heard any of it. I know I meant every word regardless. I do not think meaning it matters less for the answer being uncertain," I said. She looked at me then, something raw and unguarded in her expression. "Do you still believe this was worth the cost?" she asked. "Truthfully, not the answer you think I want to hear." "I do not know yet," I said, as honestly as I could manage through my own exhaustion. "I know that if we had not built what we built these past weeks, tonight would have ended with nothing left standing at all. I know that does not make Tarek's death, or anyone else we lost, feel like a fair trade. I am not sure there is a version of tonight that would have felt fair." Mira nodded slowly, accepting the honesty for what it was, and we sat together in silence as the first gray light of morning began creeping over the ruined eastern wall, marking the start of a day none of us had the strength yet to properly face. The days after the siege blurred together in the particular exhausting rhythm of rebuilding, clearing burned timber, tending wounds that healed slowly, holding a funeral for Tarek, and the others we had lost, that left the whole tribe hollowed out with grief for longer than any of us wanted to admit out loud. Ren threw herself into the investigation Rook had promised the night of the attack, quieter about it than Rook's open anger, but no less determined. She had spent 2 seasons learning exactly how Voss's people gathered and moved information, and she used that knowledge now against whoever had used it against us. "Someone fed him our defensive layout within the last 2 weeks before the attack," she told me, 4 days after the siege, laying out her reasoning with the careful precision I recognized from watching her plan the ravine extraction. "That narrows our suspects considerably. Not everyone knew the final palisade design. Not everyone knew which storehouse held our reserve grain." "How narrow?" I asked. "Narrow enough that I have a name," she said, quiet and certain. "Not proof yet, a name." She would not tell me who, not immediately, insisting she needed one more piece of confirmation before risking an accusation that could tear the tribe apart if she was wrong. I respected that caution, even while the uncertainty gnawed at me every time I looked across the fire at faces I had come to trust. The confirmation came 2 days later, when Ren followed a young tribe member named Rin during a supposedly routine foraging trip and watched him meet, briefly and furtively, with a rider wearing colors I recognized immediately from the siege itself. I brought Ren's account to Sable and Mira that evening, and we agreed, grimly, that this needed to happen publicly, in front of the whole council, exactly as fairly as Osk's earlier grievance had been handled, regardless of how much angrier this particular truth deserved to make us. Rin stood before the gathered tribe the next morning, confused and increasingly frightened, as Rin laid out what she had witnessed, timeline by timeline, detail by detail, until the confusion in his expression finally collapsed into something closer to resignation. "They took my sister," he said finally, voice breaking. 2 seasons ago, during a supply raid, Voss's men said she would be returned unharmed if I simply reported certain details periodically. Small things at first. Where our hunting parties ranged, how many defenders we had. I told myself it cost nothing, that it was only information, until it cost us Tarek and everyone else we lost that day. The council fell into stunned, furious silence. I felt the old instinct rise in me, the urge to simply understand and forgive too quickly, and made myself sit with the anger instead, because Rin's fear for his sister did not erase the deaths his silence had helped cause. "You should have told someone," Sable said, voice tight with barely controlled fury. "We could have found another way to help your sister. Instead, you let Voss use you as a weapon against your own people." "I know," Rin said, not defending himself further. "I have known since the day I watched the smoke rise over the eastern storehouse. I do not expect forgiveness. I only ask that whatever punishment comes, it comes without dragging my sister further into whatever consequences follow." I looked to Finn and the other elders, understanding that this decision, more than almost any other since I had arrived in this body, needed to be the tribe's collective judgment rather than mine alone. The council debated for hours, grief and fury pulling hard against the fairer instincts the same charter Ost's complaint had produced was now being asked to uphold under far harder circumstances. Rook argued for the harshest punishment available, his grief for Tarek still raw enough that I understood the anger even while I hoped the council would not follow it fully. Finn argued for restraint, reminding the gathered tribe that fear for a captive sibling was not the same crime as willing malice. In the end, Finn's voice carried the final judgment, measured and heavy with the weight of it. Death would satisfy anger, she said, but it would not return Tarek to us, and it would make an enemy permanently of whatever family Rin has remaining, family who share none of his guilt. Banishment then, effective immediately, and a formal message sent to every allied tribe describing exactly why, so that whatever protection Voss promised him proves worthless the moment he seeks refuge anywhere near us. Rin accepted the judgment without argument and left the valley within the hour, escorted to the border by Rook himself, who told me afterward that Rin had wept the entire walk, less from fear of what awaited him than from the weight of finally being free of the secret he had carried alone for 2 seasons. Interworld Courier System. Internal betrayal resolved through tribe-verified process. No trust credit adjustment. Advisory note. Unresolved grief may affect near-term governance stability. The system's clinical language felt almost obscene applied to something this raw, but I understood, turning it over that night, that it was simply being honest about what still lay ahead. Catching Rin had answered one question. It had not answered what to do with a tribe still grieving Tarek and the others, still rebuilding half our valley from ash, still uncertain whether to spend our remaining strength on vengeance or recovery. Rin found me alone that evening, her expression carrying a complicated mixture of satisfaction and something closer to sorrow. I expected to feel more triumphant, she admitted. Finding him, proving it, I only feel tired and a little sad for a boy who made a terrible choice out of love for his sister rather than out of any hatred for the rest of us. That does not make the choice less costly, I said, but I understand why it does not feel like a clean victory either. She nodded, and we sat together in the quiet a while longer. The investigation finally closed, the harder question of what came next still sitting unanswered ahead of us. That question arrived formally the following morning, when Sable called a full council to address what the tribe should do now that Rin's betrayal was resolved, and Voss's forces had retreated, at least temporarily, back toward whatever territory he still controlled. Some in this tribe want to march on Voss immediately, while his forces are weakened from the siege, she said, addressing the gathered council with the same controlled intensity she brought to every serious decision. Others want to focus entirely on rebuilding before we consider any offensive action at all. I do not think this council will find easy agreement on which path serves us better, and I think we need to decide honestly before grief or fear makes the choice for us by default. I looked around the fire at the divided expressions. Rook's barely restrained anger, Finn's cautious patience, Tessa's practical concern for resources not yet rebuilt, and understood that this argument, unlike Osk's grievance or Rin's betrayal, might not have a single answer everyone could accept equally. Elowin spoke up from the edge of the gathering, hesitant at first, unused still to voicing an opinion in a council that was not entirely her own. I know my uncle's patience better than most people here, she said. He does not forgive a costly failure quickly, but he also does not throw away resources recklessly. The siege cost him men and reputation both. He will need time to recover his own position before he can strike again with real strength. How much time? Sable asked. I do not know precisely, Elowin admitted. Weeks perhaps. Not so long that we can afford to be careless, but not so short that rushing toward him now serves us better than preparing carefully first. Rook's jaw tightened at that, clearly wanting a simpler answer than the uncertain one Elowin had offered, but he did not argue further, and I understood that even his grief recognized the practical truth underneath her caution. We will decide nothing tonight, Sable said, finally, rising to end the council session before exhaustion and grief could push anyone toward a choice they might regret. Sleep on it. Grieve properly. Those of you who have not yet allowed yourselves that. We will gather again in 2 days, once cooler heads have had time to settle. The council reconvened 2 days later, exactly as Sable had promised, though the 2 days of rest had done less to settle tempers than any of us had hoped. Rook spoke first, standing before the gathered tribe with the particular controlled intensity of someone who had spent 2 sleepless nights rehearsing his arguments. We should march within the week, he said. Voss is wounded. His forces are recovering, not rebuilding to full strength. If we strike now, decisively, we end this threat before he has the chance to gather another army twice the size of the last one. Several hunters murmured agreement, grief for Tarek, and the others still raw enough to make the promise of decisive action feel like the only honest response available. Finn spoke next, her age lending weight to caution that might have sounded merely fearful from someone younger. We buried people 4 days ago, she said. Our walls are still half rebuilt. Our stores are still recovering from the fire. Marching now, wounded as we are, risks losing everything this tribe has built in a single reckless gesture born from grief rather than strategy. I sat with both arguments turning over in my mind, understanding the pull of each honestly. Rook's anger was not wrong to want justice quickly. Finn's caution was not wrong to fear, throwing away hard-won stability on an assault we might not survive. Before I speak, I said, finally, when the council's attention turned to me, I want to ask Sable and Mira directly what they believe, because I do not trust my own judgment alone on something this important, not after everything the last few weeks have cost us. Sable considered the question seriously before answering. My instinct says strike now, while he is weakest, she said. But my instinct also told me a direct assault at the branding post would have been the right choice, months ago, and you were the one who saw a better path that day. I do not think grief should be the only voice deciding this. Mira spoke more slowly, weighing her words with obvious care. I do not believe vengeance heals what this tribe lost, she said. I believe patience, applied correctly, can accomplish more than a rushed assault ever could. Voss's strength comes from his trade, his reputation, his ability to convince other buyers and sellers that his methods work. Attack that foundation instead of his soldiers, and you weaken him without risking this tribe's remaining strength on a battlefield he may still be better prepared for than we expect. I turned that over carefully, weighing Rook's urgency against Mira's patience, Sable's instinct against her own honest doubt. I do not think we march, I said finally, addressing the full council rather than any single voice within it, not because Rook's anger is wrong to feel, and not because I do not want justice for Tarek and everyone else we lost. I think a direct assault right now risks exactly what Finn fears, throwing away hard, rebuilt strength on a battle we cannot guarantee winning cleanly. I think Mira's path, patient economic and political pressure, gives us a way to hurt Voss that does not require us to bleed for it the way we already have. Rook's expression tightened, disappointment plain, though he did not argue further immediately. Explain what that pressure looks like in practice, he said instead. I will not simply accept patience as an answer, without understanding what patience is actually meant to accomplish. Voss depends on trade routes to move what he steals, I said. He depends on buyers trusting his reputation enough to keep purchasing from him, despite increasing rumors of instability in his territory. If we can disrupt those routes, damage that reputation, and offer his usual customers a better, honest alternative through our own growing production, we weaken the foundation his entire operation depends on, without ever needing to risk another siege against defenses we have not yet fully rebuilt. Tessa nodded slowly at that, already turning the practical shape of it over in her own mind. Our forge produces finer tools than most of the region's smiths currently manage, she said. If we can establish honest trade with neighboring settlements directly, we take business away from every trader who depends on Voss's networks, including Voss himself eventually. Elowen spoke up next, quiet but certain. My uncle's reputation is built on reliability as much as fear, she said. If word spreads that his territory grows unstable, that a valley tribe he attacked with overwhelming force still stands and still trades honestly with its neighbors, other buyers will start asking uncomfortable questions about whether his business is worth the risk of association. Rook listened to all of this with visible reluctance, but I watched something in his posture ease slightly as the plan took clearer shape, less abstract patience, and more a concrete strategy with teeth of its own. Just teeth that did not require our wounded tribe to march into another battle immediately. I still want him to answer for Tarek eventually, he said finally. I will accept this path, for now, if it genuinely weakens him, rather than simply delaying an inevitable confrontation indefinitely. It does not delay anything, I said. It changes the terms of the confrontation so that when it finally comes, we face him from a position of strength instead of desperation. The council voted, not unanimously, but with clear enough majority to settle the matter, choosing the patient path over the immediate assault Rook had originally proposed. I felt the weight of that decision settle over me as the fire burned lower, understanding that I had just staked a significant portion of this tribe's trust in a strategy that would take weeks or months to prove itself, rather than the immediate satisfaction a quick strike might have offered. Denna, still favoring the shoulder Mira's careful work had saved during the siege, caught me alone after the council dispersed, her expression thoughtful rather than critical. You asked Sable and Mira before deciding, she said. I noticed. Rook noticed too, even if his pride will not let him say so directly. I do not trust myself enough yet to decide something this heavy alone, I said. Not after everything the last few weeks have cost us. That is not weakness, she said. Whatever Rook's pride wants to call it tonight, most leaders I have known would never admit that out loud, let alone act on it consistently. Sable found me alone shortly after, studying the same uncertainty I felt reflected in my own tired expression. You consulted both of us honestly before deciding, she said. That mattered, I think, more than the decision itself. Rook needed to see that this was not simply your judgment overriding his grief. He needed to see that the the whole council's wisdom shaped this choice together. I intend to keep consulting you both, I said honestly. I do not trust myself to make decisions this heavy alone, not after watching how much today's choice could cost us if I am wrong about it. Remember that feeling, Sable said quietly, something almost like warning in her tone. Remember it, especially on the days when a decision keeps simple enough to make alone. I did not fully understand what she meant by that warning, not that night, though I would have cause to remember her words far more clearly in the weeks that followed. Once Voss's response to our patient strategy revealed itself in ways none of us had fully anticipated. Voss's response to our patient strategy arrived faster than any of us expected, and it did not involve a single soldier. Within 2 weeks, 3 separate trading partners who had previously done honest business with our valley suddenly canceled their agreements, citing vague concerns about reliability that none of them could quite explain when Ren pressed for specifics. He is buying their silence or threatening their other contracts, Ren reported, after tracking down one particularly nervous former partner willing to speak quietly off the record. He cannot attack us directly again so soon after the siege, so he is trying to strangle us slowly instead, cutting off every route that does not run directly through his own controlled territory. Tessa took the news harder than I expected, given how much of the tribe's new prosperity depended on trading her workshop's output for goods we could not produce ourselves. 3 broken contracts in 2 weeks, she said, grim, at the evening council. If this continues, we will have surplus tools with nowhere honest to sell them, and no way to bring in the grain and materials we still cannot produce entirely on our own. I turned the problem over carefully, remembering lessons from my old life about suppliers who tried to lock competitors out of a market through pressure rather than genuine value. Then we find partners outside his reach, I said. Further trading routes, smaller settlements he has not yet bothered intimidating, or larger ones with enough independent strength that his threats carry less weight against them. Elowen, who had become a steady, quiet presence at our council fires over the preceding weeks, spoke up with the particular authority of someone who understood her uncle's business better than anyone else present. There is a river settlement 2 days south, she said, large enough to negotiate independently, far enough from his usual routes that his threats would cost him more effort than they are worth to enforce there. I know their lead merchant slightly, from prior dealings on my uncle's behalf. I could make an introduction. You are offering to use your family's old connections against your family's own interests, Sable said, careful rather than accusing, watching Elowen's expression closely. I am offering to use knowledge I gained honestly for a purpose I believe is right, Elowen said, steady despite the weight of what she was proposing. If that cost me my family's good opinion permanently, I decided that cost was acceptable some time ago. We traveled south 3 days later, Elowen, Tessa, and I, carrying samples of Tessa's finest work and the beginnings of a trade proposal built on honest value rather than intimidation. The river settlement's lead merchant, a shrewd, practical woman named Cora, examined Tessa's tools with obvious appreciation before turning her attention to the more complicated question of why we needed her market at all. Voss has made things difficult for us closer to home, I said, honestly, deciding transparency would serve us better than pretending strength we did not fully have yet. We are offering fair trade, not desperate charity, but I will not pretend the timing of this proposal is coincidental. Cora studied me for a long moment, then laughed, short and genuinely amused. Honesty is rarer in trade negotiations than good tools, she said. I have heard of your valley's troubles with Voss. Frankly, anyone willing to stand against that particular trader earns some goodwill in my books, regardless of the tools themselves. The agreement we secured that day was modest, smaller than what we had lost to Voss's pressure closer to home, but real, and more importantly, independent of anything he could easily threaten from this distance. Elowen's contribution to the negotiation went beyond simple introduction. She corrected 2 of my initial trade terms, pointing out subtle imbalances that would have favored Cora's settlement more than ours. Knowledge clearly drawn from years spent on the other side of exactly these kinds of negotiations. You would have given away more than necessary, she told me afterward, not unkindly, more like a colleague correcting a junior associate's honest mistake. My uncle taught me to read a contract's hidden costs before I understood what kind of man was teaching me. That skill does not disappear simply because I no longer wish to serve his interests with it. I am grateful you are using it for ours instead, I said. She was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the river settlement's busy docks. I received a message yesterday, she said, finally. From my uncle, he knows where I have been staying. He offered, one final time, to forget my absence entirely if I return now and explain it as a misunderstanding. What did you tell him? I asked carefully. Nothing yet, she admitted. I am still deciding how to answer. She made her decision 3 days after we returned to the valley, when news reached us that Voss had ordered the burning of a small trading post belonging to a merchant who had dared continue honest dealings with our tribe despite his threats. The merchant survived, barely, but lost everything he had built over a lifetime of careful, honest work. Elowen read the report in silence, her expression hardening into something I had not seen from her before, grief transforming visibly into resolve. He burned an honest man's life's work, simply to make an example, she said, quiet and furious. Not because it profited him, because he wanted everyone watching to understand what defiance costs. She sat down that evening and wrote a letter, long and detailed, laying out specific shipping manifests and trade patterns that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, exactly how much of Voss's supposedly legitimate business depended on exploitation and coercion rather than honest trade. She gave it to Rin to smuggle to 3 of his largest remaining honest trading partners, unsigned, but detailed enough that its source would be obvious to anyone who knew Voss's operations as intimately as she did. I have chosen, she told me, once it was done, some of the old uncertainty finally gone from her voice. Whatever it costs me personally, I would rather be the reason his business finally collapses than remain silent while he burns honest men's lives for the crime of trading fairly with people he has decided to hate. That night, exhausted from the weight of the day's decisions, I found myself sitting alone with Sable at the fire, longer than either of us strictly needed to. The comfortable silence between us, different somehow, from the wary alliance of our earliest weeks together. You have built something real here, Sable said, eventually, studying the fire rather than looking at me directly. Not just a tribe that survives, a tribe that other people are choosing to risk everything to help protect. I did not build it alone, I said. No, she agreed, finally meeting my eyes. You did not. Neither of us said more than that directly, but something settled between us in the quiet that followed, unspoken but understood. The particular ease of 2 people who had fought and bled and rebuilt side by side long enough to trust each other with more than simple survival. Interworld courier system. Trade disruption countered through tribe-negotiated alternative routes. Not delivered intervention. Advisory note. Adversary economic pressure escalating toward direct sabotage classification. The system's clinical warning matched exactly what Rin's own instincts were already telling her, and she said as much the following morning, tired lines around her eyes that told me she had not slept well since the burned trading post news reached us. He has lost contracts and reputation both this month, she said. A man like that does not absorb a loss like this quietly forever. Whatever he tries next will not look like broken agreements or a burned storehouse. It will look like something meant to hurt us where broken contracts cannot reach. I do not know exactly what that means yet, I admitted. Neither do I, she said. I only know Voss well enough by now to trust that guess. The trade war, as Tessa had started calling it grimly around the workshop fires, continued to favor us over the following weeks, our honest reputation spreading faster than Voss's threats could contain it. 3 new modest agreements replacing the contracts we had lost and then some. But I understood, watching Elowen's hardened resolve and remembering Sable's earlier warning about decisions made alone, that Voss was not a man who accepted losing quietly, and that his next response was unlikely to be as simple or as survivable as burning an honest merchant's trading post. Rook Scout brought word at midday, breathless from a hard run across the eastern ridge. A small convoy, lightly guarded, moving grain and coin along the old trade road toward one of Voss's remaining strongholds, unaware apparently that we had eyes that far out. 6 guards, the scout reported, no more. Wagons heavy enough that they cannot move quickly if we strike before they reach the fork toward his fortified holdings. I felt the old calculating instinct rise immediately, the same instinct that had once priced out grain shipments and supplier margins in my old life, and it told me this was exactly the kind of opportunity that would not wait for a full council to debate at length. If we move now, quietly, with Rook's fastest hunters, I said, half to myself, we intercept before they reach the fork. We cost him coin and grain both, without ever risking open battle against his main forces. Sable was away at the river settlement finalizing the second trade agreement Korra's people had proposed. Mira was tending a difficult birth 2 valleys over, gone since the previous evening and not expected back until nightfall at the earliest. I told myself, standing there with the scout's report fresh in my hands, that waiting for either of them to return would cost us the only window this convoy's route would offer. I did not send for either of them. I told myself it was simple practicality, not the deeper truth that some smaller, prouder part of me wanted to prove I could still make this kind of call cleanly on my own, the way I once had before Sable's warning at the fire made me doubt that certainty. Rook, I said, gathering him and 6 of his fastest hunters within the hour. We move now, quietly, and we take what we can before they reach the fork. Rook's expression carried a flicker of surprise I did not examine closely enough in the moment. "Sable is not here," he said, more observation than objection. "I know," I said. "This will not wait for her return, and I trust my own read on this enough to act without it today." He did not argue further, and I understand now, turning it over afterward, that some part of him assumed my confidence reflected certainty I had actually earned, rather than the older habit of a mind used to making calls alone before this world ever taught me the value of asking. We moved fast along the ridge trail, 7 of us, against a reported 6 guards. Favorable odds by any honest accounting. What none of us knew, what Elowen would have recognized instantly, had she been present instead of tending the workshop rebuild with Tessa, was that this particular convoy route ran directly past a narrow defile Voss's own scouts had used twice before as a staging point for exactly this kind of ambush in reverse. The 6 guards we saw were real. The additional dozen men waiting concealed along the defile's upper slope were not something any of us saw coming until arrows were already falling. Rook shouted the retreat almost immediately, years of hunting instinct recognizing the trap's shape before I had fully processed what was happening, and his quick call saved us from the worst of what that ambush could have cost. But 2 of his hunters took wounds serious enough to end the fight instantly, one arrow catching Dinah's already healing shoulder and reopening it badly enough that she collapsed before we cleared the defile's mouth. Another hunter named Ossian taking a strike across the thigh that left him unable to run without support. We retreated in disorder, carrying our wounded rather than any stolen grain. Rook's controlled fury at my back the entire desperate scramble home. Nobody died. I want to hold on to that fact honestly, because it is the one piece of today's disaster that could have been so much worse. But Denna's shoulder, barely healed from the siege, was torn open badly enough that Mira would later tell me it might never fully recover its former strength. Osk lost a season's worth of careful reserve grain that Voss's forces claimed instead of us claiming his. And every single hunter who had followed me into that defile now understood, in a way words alone could never have taught them, exactly how badly a decision made without the tribe's full wisdom could cost them. Interworld courier system. Unauthorized unilateral engagement resulted in tactical loss. Trust credit penalty applied. Advisory note. Decision made without council consultation, contrary to established governance pattern. The system's clinical accounting felt almost gentle compared to what I already understood sitting in the healer's tent, watching Mira's hands work with grim, exhausted precision over Dinah's reopened wound once she finally returned from the birth 2 valleys over and heard what had happened in her absence. "You did this without me," she said, not looking up from her careful stitching, her voice carrying a controlled fury I had rarely heard from her before. "Without Sable, without the council that has kept this tribe's decisions honest since the day you first asked us both what we believed, instead of simply deciding alone." "I thought the opportunity was too narrow to wait," I said, the excuse sounding hollow even as I spoke it. "Elowen would have recognized that defile in a heartbeat," Mira said, finally looking up, grief and anger both plain in her tired eyes. "Rook trusted your certainty because you have earned trust these past months. That trust is not free, Kai. It costs something when you spend it carelessly, and today, it cost Dinah a shoulder that may never fully heal, and it cost Osk grain his family needed for winter. Sable returned at dusk, and I told her everything before she could hear it secondhand from anyone else, watching her expression shift from confusion to a controlled, devastating disappointment that hurt more than any anger could have. "You asked me and Mira both, before the council voted to march, or wait after the siege," she said, quiet, each word landing with careful weight. "You told me that night you did not trust yourself to decide something that heavy alone. I believe you meant it." "I did mean it," I said. "I do not have a good explanation for why today felt different, except that it did not feel heavy enough in the moment to need asking. I was wrong about that." "It is always heavy enough," Sable said. "Every single time you consider risking someone else's life, or grain, or safety, it is heavy enough to ask. The moment it stops feeling heavy enough is exactly the moment you have started trusting your own certainty over the people who have earned the right to share that weight with you." I sat with that through most of the night, unable to sleep, replaying the scout's report and my own quiet decision not to wait, understanding with a clarity that felt almost physically painful exactly how much distance had opened up between the leader who had once asked Finn's permission before distributing a single delivered sack of grain and the man who had walked 7 hunters into an ambush because waiting felt inconvenient rather than genuinely impossible. Rook found me near dawn, exhaustion, and something more complicated than anger in his weathered face. "I followed you because I trusted the pattern you built," he said. "Ask first, weigh every voice. I did not expect today to be the day that pattern simply did not apply." It should have applied today exactly as it always has, I said. I have no honest excuse for why it did not, except that some old part of me still believes, wrongly, that a good enough read on a situation excuses skipping the harder work of asking. Rook studied me for a long moment, something in his expression easing very slightly, though not fully. Dinah will carry that shoulder's weakness for the rest of her life, he said. I would rather you learn this lesson from her wound than from something the rest of us cannot recover from, as she will have to. Learn it fully, Kai. Do not simply apologize for it and move on unchanged. I intend to, I said, and meant it more completely than I had meant almost anything since waking up in this small, unclawed body. Interworld Courier System, Governance Stability Advisory, single unresolved deviation from council pattern recorded, recovery of trust credit contingent on demonstrated behavioral correction, not verbal acknowledgement alone. The system, as always, was simply being honest about what already sat plainly in front of me. Words were not going to repair Dinah's shoulder, or Osk's lost grain, or the quiet, wounded trust in Sable's eyes when she looked at me now. Only what I chose to do differently, starting with whatever decision came next, however small or heavy it seemed in the moment, was going to prove whether today's failure had actually taught me anything, or simply given me a story to feel appropriately guilty about while changing nothing underneath. 3 weeks passed after the defile, weeks I spent proving something to this tribe that could not be proven through words alone, exactly as Rook had told me it needed to be proven. Every decision, however small, however urgent it felt in the moment, I brought first to Sable and Mira, and increasingly to Elowen and Tessa and Rin as well, resisting the old instinct to simply calculate the best answer alone and act on it before anyone could slow me down. A trading dispute with Cora's settlement over delayed payment. I brought to full council discussion before answering, even though I privately suspected the answer within minutes of hearing the complaint. A request from a smaller neighboring tribe for help repelling raiders, I brought to Rook and Sable together before committing our hunters, even though the urgency tempted me to simply decide and explain afterward. You are asking more than you used to, even for small things, Sable observed, roughly 2 weeks after the defile, watching me lay out yet another minor decision before the fire for the full council's input, rather than simply announcing my conclusion. I am asking because Dinah's shoulder taught me something I should have already known, I said. The size of the decision was never actually the measure that mattered. The measure was whether I trusted this council's wisdom more than my own certainty, and I let pride convince me otherwise exactly once, at exactly the wrong moment. Dinah herself, moving through the valley now with a careful stiffness that Mira warned would likely never fully leave her, caught me alone one evening and said something that stayed with me longer than any lecture from Sable or Mira had. I do not need you to punish yourself forever over my shoulder, she said quietly. I need you to keep doing exactly what you have been doing these past weeks. Ask, every time. That is worth more to me than guilt. The proof of that changed pattern arrived in full when word reached us of a regional summit called by 3 neighboring settlements including Cora's, meant to address growing complaints about Voss's trading practices across the wider region, complaints Elowen's smuggled evidence had done considerable work to inflame. This is bigger than a single trade agreement, Sable said, when the invitation arrived. This is every honest trader in the region deciding, together, whether Voss's methods still have a place in how business gets done here. I want to attend, I said, but I do not want to decide alone what we say there. I want this council's full voice behind whatever position we bring. The gathering that followed lasted the better part of 2 full evenings, every companion contributing exactly the piece of the argument their particular knowledge made strongest. Elowen laid out the specific manifests and shipping patterns, proving Voss's dependence on coerced and stolen labor rather than honest trade. Tessa spoke to the quality difference between goods produced through genuine craft and goods produced through frightened, exploited hands. Ren described, without flinching, exactly what 2 seasons of captivity under Voss's methods had cost her personally. Mira spoke of Dinah's shoulder and Tarek's grave, and every other cost this valley alone had paid for standing against him. Rook argued for including the defile ambush as well, and I let him tell that story fully, including my own failure at the center of it, because pretending it had not happened would have been exactly the kind of dishonesty this whole effort was built to stand against. We agreed together, before ever leaving the valley, that our position at the summit would be plain and unified, that Voss's practices should be named clearly, publicly, and permanently ended, rather than simply avoided quietly by individual traders too frightened to confront him directly. Cora's settlement hosted the summit itself, a wide gathering of traders and settlement leaders from across the region, more people in one place than I had seen since arriving in this body. Voss attended as well, summoned by the same invitation, Elowen, his composure carefully intact despite what was plainly coming. "I will not stand accused by children playing at governance," he said, once Elowen's evidence had been laid out fully before the assembled traders, his eyes finding his niece across the gathering with a contempt that made several nearby traders shift uncomfortably. "You built your case on stolen ledgers and a runaway's disloyalty. I built it on the truth you taught me to read before you ever taught me to fear you," Elowen said, steady despite the pressure of every eye in the gathering turning toward her. "I did not steal anything. I simply stopped protecting a truth that never should have needed protecting in the first place." The assembled traders debated long into the evening, weighing years of established trade relationships against the mounting, undeniable evidence Elowen and the rest of us had brought before them. Cora herself spoke last among the settlement leaders, her voice carrying the particular authority of someone who had already decided but wanted her reasoning understood fully before casting it. "I have traded honestly with this valley's tribe for a season now," she said. "I have traded with Voss for considerably longer than that, and told myself the rumors were simply the cost of doing business with a hard man in a hard trade. I no longer believe that convenient story. A man who burns honest merchants' lives for defying him, who enslaves the desperate and calls it fair contract, does not deserve the protection our continued silence has given him." The vote, when it finally came, was not unanimous. 3 smaller settlements still too entangled in Voss's networks to break cleanly from him immediately, but the majority was clear and public. A formal regional declaration naming his trading practices unlawful, his slave contracts void, his goods unwelcome at every honest market the assembled settlements controlled. Voss stood through the reading of that declaration with a stillness more unsettling than any open fury would have been, and when it finished, he looked directly at me across the gathered crowd. "You have cost me a great deal today," he said, quiet enough that only those nearest heard it clearly. "I want you to understand that this does not end here, simply because a room full of frightened traders voted against me." "I understand that clearly," I said. "I also understand that you are standing here alone tonight, without a single ally willing to speak in your defense. And that is not something I did to you. That is the accumulated weight of everything you built this business on finally coming due." He left the summit that night without another word, and Elowen watched him go with an expression I could not fully read. Grief and relief and something like exhaustion all tangled together. "It is done," she said finally. "Whatever he tries next, he tries it without the legitimacy he has hidden behind for years. Interworld courier system, adversary economic and legal legitimacy, substantially degraded through tribe-coordinated regional action, trust credit recovering, governance stability advisory resolved, demonstrated behavioral correction confirmed." The system's assessment matched what I felt settling in my own chest as we traveled home the next morning, Sable riding close beside me, her earlier disappointment finally visibly easing into something closer to the trust I had spent 3 careful weeks trying to earn back. "You asked every step of this," she said, "not because you doubted yourself constantly, because you finally understood that the asking was never about doubt. It was about honoring the people who share this weight with you." "I understand that now more completely than I did 3 weeks ago," I said. "I do not think I will forget it again." "I hope not," she said quiet. "But if you ever do, I trust this council now to remind you clearly enough that you cannot mistake the lesson a second time." We rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. The valley waiting ahead of us diminished in none of its danger. Voss still out there somewhere, nursing a wound to his pride and his purse both. But the ground beneath our feet solid in a way it had not been since before the defile, earned honestly through weeks of small, careful choices rather than a single dramatic gesture. Word of Voss's unraveling reached us in pieces over the following months, each report a little more thorough than the last, the particular satisfaction of watching a cruel man's foundations crumble, tempered always by the memory of what it had cost to bring him down. The regional declaration held, settlement after settlement, emboldened by Cora's example and the mounting evidence Elowen's testimony had made impossible to ignore quietly any longer, closed their markets to Voss's goods and his coerced labor both. His remaining trading partners, the ones too entangled to break cleanly at the summit, found their own businesses suffering as buyers further down every chain began asking uncomfortable questions about where cheap grain and cheap labor had actually come from. "He is reduced to trading with settlements too desperate or too corrupt to care where his goods originate," Ren reported, some months after the summit, having tracked his movements through her old network of contacts, with the same patient thoroughness she brought to every task. 3 of his largest former buyers have publicly distanced themselves. His own household staff have begun leaving faster than he can replace them. The final confrontation, when it came, was not the battle any of us had once feared it might become. Voss arrived at our valley's border alone, no army behind him this time, no overseer sent to test us on his behalf, simply an aging traitor whose empire had collapsed under the weight of its own cruelty, requesting, of all things, an audience. Sable wanted to refuse him outright. Rook wanted him escorted out at spear point. I understood both instincts and overruled neither fully, choosing instead to bring the question to the full council one final time, exactly as 3 weeks of careful practice after the defile had taught me to do. We agreed, together, that refusing to hear him would cost us nothing he had not already lost, but that hearing him, publicly, before the tribe he had once tried to erase entirely, would finish what the summit had started, in a way that mattered more than simply ignoring his existence. He stood before the gathered valley 2 days later, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with his physical bearing, and everything to do with the absence of the certainty that had once made him so dangerous. I came to see what I built against, he said finally, looking around at the rebuilt palisade, the thriving forge, the fields Tessa's tools had made more productive than they had ever been under any prior tending. I told myself for years that cruelty was simply efficient, that kindness was a luxury weak traders indulged in before reality corrected them. Elowen stepped forward from among the gathered tribe, her uncle's former protege standing now fully and visibly on the other side of everything he represented. Reality has corrected you now, she said, quiet but carrying easily across the silent gathering, not because kindness is weak, because cruelty builds nothing that lasts once the people it depends on finally have somewhere honest to stand instead. Voss looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his tired features, before his gaze shifted to me. You have 5 companions who would each, I suspect, walk into fire for you, he said. I built an empire on fear, and never once earned that from a single person who served me. I do not know when I decided fear was sufficient. I only know, standing here now, that it was never going to be enough. I do not offer you forgiveness, I said, honestly, because pretending otherwise would dishonor Tarek and Dinah, and every honest merchant whose life your methods cost. But I do not need you destroyed further, either. What is left of your former empire is already correcting itself without any further push from us. He left the valley that afternoon and did not return, and the reports that reached us over the following seasons described a man reduced to modest, honest trading in a small border settlement, the last of his coerced workers freed and resettled among neighboring tribes who had no interest in repeating his methods. The wider transformation proved larger than any single man's fall. The human cities that had once depended heavily on operations like Voss's for cheap grain and cheap coerced labor found themselves over the following 2 years increasingly unable to compete with the honest, skilled production our valley and its growing network of trading partners now offered freely. Markets that had once undervalued craft in favor of exploited volume slowly reordered themselves around fair value instead, and settlements built on our model, ours and Cora's, and the growing web of honest trade we had helped establish, thrived while the cities still clinging to Voss's old methods found their coffers thinner each season, their reputation for reliability eroded by the same rot that had finally caught up with him. We did not set out to make the human cities poorer, I said once to Mira, turning the strange irony over during one of our quiet evenings by the fire. We only set out to build something honest. Perhaps that is exactly why it worked, she said. Cruelty always looks efficient, right up until the moment the people it depends on stop tolerating it. Then everything built on that foundation simply comes due at once. Our valley, 3 years after I first woke up in this small, unclawed body, bore little resemblance to the starving tribe that had once nearly cast me out for uselessness. The forge Tessa had built ran day and night, producing tools traded fairly across a dozen honest settlements. The fields, tended with equipment no other tribe in the region could match, fed us through winters that had once threatened starvation as a yearly certainty. Sable led the tribe's defense with an authority no longer questioned by anyone. Her partnership with me settled into something neither of us needed to name formally to understand completely. Mira's shrine had grown into a proper healing house, training apprentices from 3 neighboring settlements in techniques she had once practiced alone by firelight. Rin moved as freely now as anyone in the region, her old captivity transformed into an unmatched knowledge of trade routes, an honest intelligence that kept us safer than any wall alone could manage. Tessa's workshop employed a dozen artisans now, her reputation for quality drawing apprentices eager to learn from the finest smith in the region. Elowen, no longer anyone's niece or anyone's observer, ran the valley's expanding trade relationships with the same careful precision she had once applied to her uncle's ledgers, now turned fully toward honest purposes. Interworld Courier System. Long-term governance stability confirmed. Trust credit at sustained peak capacity. Advisory note. System function now supplementary to tribe self-sufficiency rather than essential to it. I read that final advisory slowly, sitting on the same modest rise above the valley where I had first understood, all those seasons ago, that survival alone was never going to be worth pursuing without also earning the trust of the people beside me. The system had started as the only thing standing between this small, unclogged body and a quick death by exposure. It ended, 3 years later, as a quiet, almost unnecessary companion to a tribe that no longer needed water or cotton or grain delivered from anywhere but its own honest, hard-won capability. Sable found me there as the sun began settling behind the ridgeline, the valley spread out below us, lit gold, and busy with the particular contented noise of a place that had built something worth defending, honestly, rather than something merely worth fearing losing. "Regretting any of it?" she asked, settling beside me with the easy familiarity of 3 years spent building this life together. "Not once," I said. "Not the mistakes, not the weight of Tarek's grave or Dinah's shoulder, not even the seasons before either of us understood how much we would come to rely on each other. All of it built this." She said nothing further, only leaned into the quiet beside me, and we watched the valley settle into evening together. 5 companions and a tribe, and an empire built honestly enough that even its harshest enemy had finally admitted, standing alone at its border, that cruelty was never going to outlast it.
This is where I leave you for tonight, though I suspect you already guessed that from how the fire's gone low and the valley's gone quiet below us. 3 years, 5 companions, one stubborn empire built out of water deliveries and cotton swabs, and a runt nobody expected to survive his first winter. I did not plan any of it cleanly, and I would not trade a single hard season for a smoother version of this story. Thank you for staying through every delivery, every mistake, every small, honest choice that added up to something worth defending. Rest well tonight. The valley will still be here in the morning, and so I hope will you.